What is this? Jian Wushuang picked up the token and squinted his eyes. The handle of the token was formed by a 9-fingered dragon claw, and the tip of the token was a huge dragon head, roaring in anger. Although it was carved into a dead object, it gave people a sense of fear. It was as if there was a huge dragon that could swallow the sun and moon, staring at Jian Wushuang and forcing him to let go of the token. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang snorted coldly, and a vast amount of divine power gushed out immediately. It wiped away the aura that someone had left on the token. Jian Wushuang looked at the token carefully again. There was a line of small words engraved on the token. The 5th generation flame dragon, Long Han. Is this Qiu Long's real name? Jian Wushuang was lost in thought. The dragon race was one of the most ancient races in the universe. They had been around since the birth of the universe's first ancestral dragon, and had reproduced for countless chaos cycles. However, it was extremely difficult for the dragon race to produce offspring, and they had only been around for 7 generations. Other than a few atavism phenomena, generally speaking, the closer the dragon was to the ancestral dragon, the stronger the power of the generation. And this Qiu Long must be the 5th generation of the dragon clan. If I'm not wrong, this dragon pattern token should be the dragon clan's pass. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered with thoughts. The dragon clan's habitat had always been the biggest mystery in the universe. Some said that the dragon clan was 90,000 miles deep in the sea, some said that it was in the center of the earth, and some said that it was above the 18 levels of heaven. In short, there were many different opinions and no one could give a true answer. After all, ever since the birth of the dragon clan, there had never been a real dragon clan that had fallen in the outside world. Therefore, the outside world naturally knew very little about the dragon clan. Perhaps I can use this token to find the location of the dragon clan. Jian Wushuang touched the slightly warm token with his fingers. For him, the dragon clan was indeed powerful and could definitely cause a destructive blow to him. However, it was impossible for the dragon clan to use the entire clan's power to deal with Jian Wushuang alone. Not to mention how much turmoil it would set off in the universe. It would be too embarrassing. At most, they would only send a law enforcement officer. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang reached out to touch the sandalwood sword case beside him, and a touch of coldness flashed in his eyes. It had been 20,000 years since he had obtained the tarot sword in the tarot ruins. For the past 20,000 years, Jian Wushuang had infused sword qi into the tarot divine sword to nourish it every day. Even now, Jian Wushuang did not know how many sword qi were sealed in the tarot divine sword that had never been unsheathed. It was an astronomical figure that even Jian Wushuang was terrified of. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang put the sandalwood sword case on his back and walked out of the palace in a black robe and a big black linen hood. Due to the battle between Jian Wushuang and Qiu Long, the ruins of the 18th city had been completely repaired. Except for the sword mark that split the 18th city into 2 sides, the 18th city was no different from before. In the 18th city, the Overlord, the 9-star Saint, Commander Mountain Shaker, and Ruler Hao Jin stood silently on both sides of the palace that Qiu Long had built. Jian Wushuang strode in and naturally turned around to sit on the throne in the deepest part of the hall. Then he glanced at their faces and said in a deep voice without any expression, "Everyone, now that the 18th city has been fully restored, it's time to re-establish the rules of the 18th city." Hearing this, the Overlord and the others were shocked. They knew that Jian Wushuang was about to make a move. They looked at each other in silence and sighed in their hearts. They only hoped that Jian Wushuang would not go too far like Qiu Long and take away the few investiture of the gods from them. However, a hint of excitement flashed through the faces of Commander Mountain Shaker and Ruler Hao Jin. This ancient path of stars gathered all the geniuses of the universe. If they could gather them together, they would definitely become a top force in the future. It should be known that these heaven's favorites were either the lead disciples of their respective sects or the princes and holy sons of some big forces. Moreover, they all had the hope of breaking through to the supreme level. If Jian Wushuang could be on good terms with them, he would be invincible in the universe. Jian Wushuang sat on the throne and glanced at their faces one by one. He read their minds and said indifferently, "Everyone, This king wants to form a major power on the ancient path of stars. Its name will be Sword Union. What do you think? Hearing this, the overlord and the others' expressions changed slightly, and a touch of uneasiness flashed in their hearts. Looking at Jian Wushuang's indifferent expression, they suddenly realized that Jian Wushuang was not asking them, but giving them a notice. After a long time, the 9-star Saint's son asked carefully, "Jian Wushuang, what do you need us to do?" Jian Wushuang replied indifferently, "It's simple. If you join the Sword Union, you will have countless divine materials and supreme treasures. I can even give you the investiture of the gods. If you don't want to join, I won't force you." Hearing the words investiture of the gods, the conqueror and the others were all moved. They continued to ask respectfully, "Jian Wushuang, if we join the Sword Union, what should we do?" Jian Wushuang smiled and replied, "Everyone, I know what you're worried about. I'm not a brutal and tyrannical person like Qiu Long. My original intention of forming the Sword Union was to help each other so that we can look out for each other after we leave the ancient path of stars. I know that each of you has a sect behind you, so my Sword Union isn't a mandatory sect, but more like an alliance. When you're in trouble, you can help each other." After a pause, Jian Wushuang continued, "Of course, you can't just say that. You have to take an oath and integrate the rules into your own laws. If you break this oath, your cultivation will not advance for the rest of your life." Jian Wushuang's tone became serious. Hearing this, the overlord and the others looked at each other, deep in thought. If that was the case, it was not impossible. After all, with Jian Wushuang's strength and talent, it was almost certain that as long as Jian Wushuang did not die halfway, he would definitely achieve amazing achievements in the future. If he could build a good relationship with Jian Wushuang, it would definitely be beneficial for him and the sect behind him. The most important thing was that Jian Wushuang had almost all of the investiture of the gods. If they wanted to get the investiture of the gods, they had to rely on him. A moment later, they all nodded and knelt down. "We're waiting. We pay our respects to the Sword Union's chief, the overlord, the 9-star Saint," and the others' voices rang out in the hall at the same time. Jian Wushuang nodded with satisfaction in his eyes and said, "There's no need for formalities, get up." For Jian Wushuang, he had 91 investiture of the gods in his hands. In fact, it was not a big deal to give up some of the investiture of the gods as long as he could make sure that he had no less than 50 of them. As long as he had no less than 50 god sealing tablets, he would still have an absolute advantage in getting the entrance ticket to the universe banquet of all races. If he could rely on the remaining investiture of the gods to recruit the overlord and the others, the gains would undoubtedly be huge. In the universe, be it the Dragon Clan or the Great Void Temple, they were all eyeing him covetously. Although Jian Wushuang was not afraid, it was still a good thing to have an extra backup plan. And this Sword Union was one of the backup plans he had prepared. Although these people were only at the ultimate ruler realm and were not worth mentioning when compared to the Great Void Temple and the Dragon Tribe, they were all extremely talented and had limitless potential. Jian Wushuang had gathered them together. When they grew up, they would be able to fight against any major force in the future. After a while, the Overlord and the others all made a Dharma oath and joined the Sword Union. At this point, a top force that would shake the universe in the future was born. As for Jian Wushuang, he left the hall after giving a few instructions. He started to refine his divine power and improve his cultivation. Meanwhile, outside the ancient path of stars, a black-robed, middle-aged man with an aquiline nose was like a ghost in the dark night. He had arrived outside the ancient path of stars. He casually looked around and saw that the outside of the ancient path of stars was quite deserted. There was no one around. He immediately opened up a piece of void and quietly sat down cross-legged, restraining his aura. He was the Black Eagle ruler. After a long journey through the universe, he had finally arrived outside the ancient path of stars. "Lord Hallmaster, I've arrived outside the ancient path of stars." He sent a message to the Hallmaster of Cosmos Temple in his mind. "Alright, once the ancient path of stars is over, you can kill Jian Wushuang here. This time, we can't afford any mistakes. Do you understand?" A deep and majestic voice sounded in his mind. It was the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. Hall Master, don't worry. No matter how strong Jian Wushuang is, he only has the cultivation of a ruler. As long as he shows his head, I can crush him in an instant. The Black Eagle ruler sneered. Then I will wait for your good news in the Divine Hall. A moment later, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple hung up the transmission with Black Eagle ruler. The Black Eagle ruler's entire body was hidden within the void as he turned his gaze toward the entrance of the ancient path of stars. Jian Wushuang, you were lucky last time. Heartslayer saved you. I'd like to see who else can save you this time. The Black Eagle ruler sneered to himself as the cold glint in his eyes almost materialized. Time passed and time changed. In the blink of an eye, another 10,000 years had passed. The ancient path of stars was filled with new blood. However, because Jian Wushuang had monopolized the investiture of the gods, as the number of people increased, there were not many fights. On the contrary, countless cultivators joined the Sword Union. After all, only Jian Wushuang's family was left on the ancient path of stars. If they wanted to get the God Sealing Tablet, they could only rely on Jian Wushuang. The Sword Union had become the most powerful faction on the ancient path of stars. Jian Wushuang did not stay idle either. During the past 10,000 years, he had completely stabilized his cultivation base at the ultimate ruler realm. Although he was still far from breaking through to the supreme realm, he had laid a good foundation. There were only 50,000 years left before the Grand Clan gathering would begin. One day, while Jian Wushuang was cultivating in seclusion, an unexpected person suddenly came to him. Lord Alliance Leader, Lord Guardian Blue is waiting outside the palace. An ultimate ruler in armor knelt outside Jian Wushuang's room and said respectfully, Lady Blue. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and he was deep in thought. Now, in the entire ancient path of stars, the only person Jian Wushuang was not clear about was Lady Blue. He had once asked the Overlord and the others who had arrived on the ancient path of stars early. However, they also didn't know much about Lady Blue. They only knew that Lady Blue's origin was mysterious and that he had never participated in disputes. It was as if he wasn't here to fight for the God Sealing Tablet, but more to record everything that had happened on the ancient path of stars. This person, why did he suddenly come to find me? Tell the Lord Guardian to wait in the hall. I'll be there soon. Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts and replied indifferently. Yes. The final ruler in charge of sending the message hurriedly left. Jian Wushuang didn't delay for long. After putting away the tarot sword manual, he also rushed to the hall. Not long after, he saw Lady Blue. Lady Blue was still dressed in a plain blue light shirt and his face was covered with a blue veil. Even though Jian Wushuang had broken through to become an ultimate ruler, he was still unable to see Lady Blue's true appearance behind the veil. Jian Wushuang could not help but feel slightly surprised. Lady Blue, long time no see. After collecting his thoughts, Jian Wushuang cupped his hands at her and smiled. Hee. It's you who haven't seen me in a long time. I see you quite often. Lady Blue replied with a smile. What? Jian Wushuang was stunned and did not understand what she meant. Just as he was about to ask, Lady Blue continued to speak and said jokingly, Jian Wushuang, it's really not easy to see you now. I have to send a message and report to you. You really have a big presence. Lady Blue, you're putting me down by saying this. Jian Wushuang could not help but wave his hand. After ordering someone to give Lady Blue a seat, he boiled a pot of spiritual tea, cleared his throat, and asked, I wonder why you've come to find me? Lady Blue took a sip of the tea and looked at Jian Wushuang. She replied, Jian Wushuang, I'm here to talk to you about the Great Clan Gathering. The Great Clan Gathering? Doesn't that mean there's still 50,000 years before it starts? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and a trace of doubt flashed in his heart. But he asked calmly, Lady Blue, what do you mean by saying this now? Bada. Lady Blue put down her teacup and shook her head. Jian Wushuang, it seems that you don't know this. The spots for the Great Clan Gathering are not chosen at the same time, but they are given out one after another according to the time period. After 50,000 years, the Great Clan Gathering will really start. The same goes for the 3 spots on the ancient path of stars. Oh, Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. He was not a stupid person, so he immediately guessed something and asked, Lady Blue, you mean to say that the first candidate for the great clan gathering has already been decided? Not bad. Lady Blue slowly nodded. Then, who's the first candidate? Jian Wushuang picked up the teacup, sipped the tea, and asked calmly. Lady Blue laughed when he heard this, but she didn't answer. Instead, she asked, You should have an answer in your heart, right? Jian Wushuang's hand that was holding the teacup stopped. He pondered for a while, then put the teacup down. He turned to look at Lady Blue and said, I'm the first candidate? That's right. When Lady Blue said that he had already chosen the first candidate, Jian Wushuang's guess was pretty close. As expected, Lady Blue nodded and replied, Naturally, it's you. Jian Wushuang, your performance on the ancient path of stars has been seen by that lord. He sent me an order a few days ago to give you the first place to enter the great clan gathering. After she finished speaking, she stretched out her hand and smiled. Jian Wushuang, congratulations. Even though Jian Wushuang was mentally prepared, his heart could not help but skip a beat when he heard Lady Blue's definite answer. He felt that it was a little unreal. That was an entrance ticket to a grand gathering of all races in the universe that was held once every 50 chaos cycles. In the great clan gathering, the supremes of all clans would gather to discuss the great Tao of heaven and earth. According to the previous rules, an ultimate ruler like Jian Wushuang would not even have the chance to touch the threshold. However, Jian Wushuang had become the first person to enter the great clan gathering. Jian Wushuang could not help sighing with emotion. On the ancient path of stars, countless people had left behind piles of corpses for such an illusory quota. A general success was built on 10,000 bones. Too many people had lost their lives on this ancient path of stars. They had spent countless years and effort, coming from all over the world, all for the sake of getting a spot in the universe banquet of all races. Everyone was looking forward to becoming the lucky one to be pampered. From then on, their cultivation would skyrocket and they would become famous in the universe. They advanced wave after wave, eager to try. However, except for a few people who stood at the peak, most of the ultimate rulers on the ancient path of stars had become the stepping stones of others. In the end, they had helped others while they themselves had turned into a pile of yellow soil and withered bones. They had died and their Tao had disappeared. They had been forgotten by time. Jian Wushuang was one of them. Fortunately, he finally got the qualification to enter the competition. He took a deep breath and in the next moment, the emotion in his eyes disappeared and was replaced with determination. Thank you, he said. Jian Wushuang stretched out his hand and shook Lady Blue's hand. Seeing this, Lady Blue smiled and withdrew his palm. A white jade pendant appeared under his right hand. Jian Wushuang, this jade pendant is the invitation to the great clan gathering. Lady Blue pushed the jade pendant with his right hand and handed it to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang nodded and took the jade pendant carefully. He lowered his head and looked at it. There were no words on the jade pendant. It was cool to the touch, as if it was an ordinary item. However, the moment Jian Wushuang felt it, he was shocked. He felt as if he was in chaos. At this time, the universe had yet to be born and the world was still in a yin-yang chaos. He was like the most inconspicuous grain of sand in this chaos, insignificant to the extreme. That feeling of being a drop in the ocean or a grain in Taizong was truly too insignificant. The next moment, the jade pendant turned into a warm current and disappeared into Jian Wushuang's hand. After that, the two of them chatted for a while. Lady Blue told him that the God's sealing tablet had been cleared, and those who had obtained a spot in the universe banquet had to leave the ancient path of stars to avoid affecting the fairness of others competing for the invitation. After saying this, Lady Blue planned to leave. Well, Jian Wushuang, you've received the invitation to the great clan gathering. My task is complete, so I'll take my leave. Lady Blue stood up and said with a smile. Jian Wushuang nodded and looked at Lady Blue's back as she left. He could not help but ask, Lady Blue, if I may ask, what is your identity? Lady Blue's steps, which had already crossed the threshold, could not help but pause. He turned around and smiled. Is that important? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang touched his nose and knew that he had asked too much. However, at this moment, Lady Blue smiled and added, Jian Wushuang, we'll meet again at the great clan gathering. After saying that, Lady Blue no longer hesitated. In a flash, she disappeared at the door of Jian Wushuang's hall. The moon splashed across the river of stars, and the crows cried at midnight. Is it time to leave? Jian Wushuang stood at the entrance of the hall with his hands behind his back. He raised his head and looked at the devastating galaxy unique to the ancient path of stars. A thoughtful look flashed in his eyes. He was now the most powerful being on the ancient path of stars, and he had the ticket to the feast of all races in the universe. There was no point in staying here. To him, leaving at this moment was indeed the best choice. But before I leave, I have to make arrangements for Sword Union. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself and his eyes flickered. After 10,000 years of development, the Sword Union had become quite well known. There were more than 100 top-tier ultimate rulers, and there were dozens of them who were almost invincible. Besides Jian Wushuang, the Overlord, the 9 Stars Saint Sun, and the young clan leader of Maluo were all unparalleled rulers and could lead an area. This kind of power, not to mention the ancient path of stars, even in the universe, as long as a supreme wasn't present, it was enough to sweep everything in the world. Although such a powerful force did not have strict sect rules, in the past 10,000 years, it had naturally formed a huge force with Jian Wushuang as the core. According to the division of strength, the status of the force was divided. The next day, Jian Wushuang gathered all the high-level experts of Sword Union in the hall. The next morning, in the hall of the Sword Union, Jian Wushuang sat on the throne. On the two sides, starting from the Overlord and young clan leader Maluo, the high-level members of the Sword Union were arranged in rows. Jian Wushuang was expressionless. Although he didn't speak, a sharp pressure formed naturally and pressed down invisibly. Everyone in the hall lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at Jian Wushuang's eyes. The entire hall was silent. No one dared to speak before Jian Wushuang did. Unknowingly, Jian Wushuang was no longer the nameless person who could be manipulated by others. Now, he was the king who held the power of life and death in the entire ancient path of stars. He was the only powerful being on the ancient path of stars who no one dared to disobey. I'm going to announce something. Listen carefully. I'll leave the ancient path of stars in 3 days, and the God Sealing Tablet will be cleared again to select the second ruler to enter the great clan gathering. Sitting on the throne, Jian Wushuang was expressionless as he spoke slowly. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire ancient path of stars burst into an uproar. It seems that Lord Alliance Leader has already obtained the first spot to participate in the great clan gathering. What? Lord Alliance Leader, you're leaving the ancient path of stars. The investiture of the gods will be reset to 0. In an instant, the entire hall exploded like a boiler, and the sounds of discussion rose one after another. Even the Overlord, the 9 Stars Saint Sun, and the young clan leader of Maluo raised their heads to look at Jian Wushuang, their pupils contracting. Be quiet. Jian Wushuang pressed down with his right hand and spoke indifferently. In an instant, the noisy hall quieted down. Everyone forced down the words that were about to come out of their mouths and looked at Jian Wushuang with respect. Jian Wushuang's expression was indifferent as he glanced at them one by one. Although they didn't speak, their expressions were mixed with joy and worry. Jian Wushuang naturally understood what they were thinking and sneered in his heart. He was afraid that once he left the ancient path of stars, the seemingly powerful Sword Union would collapse and return to its previous state of killing. Jian Wushuang didn't intend to solve this problem by force. After all, the Sword Union was just a backup plan he left behind. It was just for him to unite when he faced the oppression of the major forces in the future. Therefore, he didn't care what they did in private after he left. In any case, some of the true experts with decent potential on the ancient path of stars had already made a law oath with him. This was something that could not be changed. All right, now I want to talk about the leadership of Sword Union after I leave. Jian Wushuang looked at the Overlord, the 9 Stars Saint Sun, and the young master of the Molo tribe, Huang Mo, and said, The Overlord, 9 Stars Saint, and Huang Mo, after I leave, The three of you will be in charge of maintaining the overall situation in Sword Union. Is there a problem? Yes. We will obey the Alliance Master's orders. The Overlord, Huang Mo, and the 9 Stars Saint all stepped forward and cupped their hands in acknowledgement. Jian Wushuang nodded and glanced at the three of them. The Overlord and Huang Mo looked normal but solemn. One of them had been saved by Jian Wushuang, who had saved his life, and the other had chosen to submit to him even if he had to die. On the other hand, the 9 Stars Saint's eyes, which had his head lowered, flashed with a strange look. Jian Wushuang took in their expressions but didn't care. He said, "As for the others, everything will be the same. There's no need to change." After giving some other instructions, such as letting Commander Mountain Shaker lead the army on behalf of the Overlord and the other two, Jian Wushuang announced that everyone was leaving. However, before everyone left, Jian Wushuang called out to Ruler Hao Jin, who was standing at the back row. Jian Wushuang stepped down from the throne. At that moment, he no longer had any majestic aura. It was as if he had become the most ordinary teenager again. "Hao Jin, do you blame me for not giving you a commander position before I left?" Jian Wushuang looked at him and smiled. Ruler Hao Jin hurriedly explained, "Sir Bloodsword, I would never dare to think that way. Although I am slow, I understand that you are doing this because you don't want me to attract too much attention and make others jealous." Ruler Hao Jin was the only person who addressed Jian Wushuang as Lord Bloodsword. It was as if Jian Wushuang was still the person who had led him through the ancient path of stars. "I'm relieved that you can think this way." Jian Wushuang smiled, paused, and said, "Hao Jin, I didn't place you in the higher-ups of the Sword Union because you said so. Once I leave, I'm afraid the ancient path of stars will once again be in chaos. At that time, if you take the position of commander, you'll definitely be the target of everyone's focus fire. On the contrary, it's possible that you'll be killed." After saying that, Jian Wushuang patted Ruler Hao Jin's shoulder and continued, "For us cultivators, status and position are just empty titles. You don't need to care about it. As long as you are strong enough, everything is just at your fingertips." "Lord Bloodsword, I understand." Ruler Hao Jin nodded heavily upon hearing this. Jian Wushuang replied with an N and took out a glass jade bottle. He said, "Hao Jin, in this jade bottle, there are 2 drops of venom that I refined from Heavenly Snake Playboy's venomous fangs. There were originally 3 drops, but I have other uses for the last drop, so I won't give it to you. With these 2 drops of poison, as long as you don't encounter an invincible ruler, I imagine no one on the ancient path of stars will be able to harm you. Isn't this little too valuable?" Ruler Hao Jin was still hesitating. Jian Wushuang flipped his right hand again, and a small black sword appeared in his hand. He said indifferently, "Hao Jin, keep this small sword well. I've specially refined this for you to defend yourself before I left. 3 of my sword chi are sealed in this small sword, and each one is stronger than the previous one. In terms of power, it's much stronger than the 2 drops of poison. If you use it properly, you can kill even an invincible ruler like the 9 Stars Saint with the last sword chi." After saying that, Jian Wushuang's expression gradually became serious. In the end, he said in a deep voice, "Hao Jin, you must use these 5 protective items with caution. Otherwise, once you use all 5 of them, no one will be able to save you if you provoke any other supreme figures." "Yes." Ruler Hao Jin's expression turned serious. He didn't dare to be negligent. He carefully put away the glass jade bottle and the small black sword that Jian Wushuang had given him. Then, he nodded heavily and said, "Lord Bloodsword, don't worry. I will definitely take good care of Sword Union for you." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help smiling and said, "As for the Sword Union, just leave it to fate. No need to worry about it. You, on the other hand, can be considered someone who has gone through thick and thin with me. The ancient path of stars is filled with danger, and after I leave, the competition for the God's sealing tablet will only become more intense and crazy. Thus, I only hope that you can protect yourself and increase your strength." After that, Jian Wushuang did not say anything more. He smiled at him and strode away. 3 days later, In the 18th city of the ancient path of stars, countless people were sending him off with great respect. Jian Wushuang was wearing a black robe, a hood, and a sandalwood sword case on his back. He left the ancient path of stars step by step and disappeared from everyone's sight. It was as if the legend of the ancient path of stars had finally come to an end. Jian Wushuang left. He rode the wind on his flying sword, passing through 18 cities before arriving at the first city on the ancient path of stars. Some newcomers didn't know Jian Wushuang, so they talked with each other and walked past him, describing their bright future on the ancient path of stars. Jian Wushuang looked back. He had spent tens of thousands of years on the ancient path of stars. From an ordinary fifth-stage great ruler, he had become the most powerful ruler in the entire universe. He had left behind too many legends here, and now they were finally going to say goodbye. At this moment, they were sighing with emotion, but more than that, they were eager to return home. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and turned around with determination. He stepped onto the first city's exit. A boundless darkness attacked. When Jian Wushuang opened his eyes again, he had already appeared outside the ancient path of stars. In the tens of thousands of years, the changes outside the ancient path of stars couldn't be considered big. There were still people from various major forces stationed here, peddling and selling the divine medicines and divine materials they had brought from the ancient path of stars. They only took a glance at Jian Wushuang and then ignored him. They went back to their own work. Although Jian Wushuang was famous now, there were only a few people who had seen him and recognized him. The scene of him fighting with Qiulong was basically only spread among the higher-ups of the major forces. What Jian Wushuang didn't know was that after he walked out of the ancient path of stars, a man with an aquiline nose who was sitting cross-legged in the void suddenly opened his eyes. "Kid, you're finally out." Black eagle ruler's gaze pierced through the void and fixed on Jian Wushuang. The corners of his mouth gradually curled into a cruel smile. He had been waiting for nearly 10,000 years and was accompanied by the dull universe every day. He had long been impatient to the extreme. Now that he saw Jian Wushuang walking out of the ancient path of stars, he could no longer suppress the killing intent in his heart. Boom! In an instant, he struck out a palm and pressed it toward Jian Wushuang. Under this palm, the entire starry sky in front of the ancient path of stars trembled madly. A destructive might descended. What is this? The faces of the ultimate rulers who were shouting in front of the ancient path of stars changed as they looked up in shock. It's the aura of a supreme being. A supreme martial artist has made his move. Not good, quickly run. Countless people shot up and scattered like birds and beasts. Some of the slower ultimate rulers were only touched by the palm and were instantly annihilated. Jian Wushuang raised his head and his pupils shrank. He could feel that the supreme martial artist's palm that had descended from the sky was firmly locked onto him. Who is it? Jian Wushuang's face turned extremely gloomy. He had not expected that someone would come to kill him the moment he stepped out of the ancient path of stars. The great void temple? Or a dragon? Jian Wushuang didn't have time to think about it. The Wuxia divine sword was instantly unsheathed and turned into a shocking silver rainbow, slashing at the huge palm that was falling from the sky. Now that Jian Wushuang had used the star-slashing sword again, the power was terrifying. Even an unparalleled ruler would be killed by this sword. This sword was like a backward galaxy. In a short moment, it condensed all the energy around it. Instantly, the silver sword rainbow became extremely bright and released endless brilliance as it slashed at the huge palm. However, such a terrifying sword attack only made the giant palm slow down for a moment before it was obliterated by the terrifying power of the giant palm. It then pressed down on Jian Wushuang again. However, this momentary pause was enough for Jian Wushuang. Bang! Jian Wushuang took a step forward and moved away in an instant. Then he appeared 100 miles away. Gotcha! As the palm pressed down, it directly turned the pressing void into a huge black hole and shattered countless void fragments. Jian Wushuang, who was 100 miles away, was panting slightly. He seemed to have sensed something and raised his head to look at the void. The next moment, He then saw a black-robed man with an aquiline nose walk out of the void with his hands behind his back. Jian Wushuang, do you still remember who I am? The arrogant man in black sneered. He didn't care that Jian Wushuang had dodged his palm and said sarcastically, "It's you." Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. After taking a deep breath, he forcibly suppressed the throbbing in his heart and sneered, "How could I not remember the Black Eagle ruler?" This person was the Black Eagle ruler of Cosmos Temple, who had almost killed Jian Wushuang in 9 Phoenix Great Star area when he was traveling the universe. Back then, if not for 9 Emperor Pavilion's Heartslayer stopping him, Jian Wushuang would have died in Black Eagle's hands and his special life form would have been stripped. Jian Wushuang, I haven't seen you for tens of thousands of years. I've missed you so much. The Black Eagle ruler stared at Jian Wushuang and said with a smile. Although he was laughing, the coldness in his voice was enough to freeze the blood. Jian Wushuang was expressionless when he heard that. He mobilized all the divine power in his body and his body was extremely tense. This was a supreme martial artist, the highest existence in the universe. Even though he was thousands of times stronger than when he had first met the Black Eagle ruler, Jian Wushuang still felt a mountain-like pressure coming at him. He knew that this would be the most dangerous battle he had ever encountered. No one could help him in this battle. He could only rely on himself. Jian Wushuang, I'll give you 2 choices now. The first is to follow me back to Cosmos Temple and accept my punishment. The second option is to strip you of your special life form as a form of respect for the might of my god-slaying spear. It's your choice. The Black Eagle ruler had an arrogant look on his face, as if he was a god who had already decided Jian Wushuang's life and death. It was as if Jian Wushuang had already become a fish on his chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. Jian Wushuang, I think you will never want to experience the feeling of being deprived of your special life force. At this point, a cruel look flashed across the eyes of the Black Eagle ruler. Jian Wushuang let out a sigh of relief and said, I choose? Oh? You're planning to surrender just like that. The brows of the Black Eagle ruler twitched as he gave a faint smile. Jian Wushuang, you're quite tactful this time. Before he could finish, I choose for you to die. Boom. Jian Wushuang stomped his feet and shot toward the Black Eagle like a missile, leaving behind a white blast of air. A terrifying sword chi gushed out in all directions, forming a half-moon sword light that could split the heavens and earth apart. In just a breath's time, it had arrived above Black Eagle ruler, slashing down at him. I gave you face, but you didn't want it. You're looking for death. The Black Eagle ruler's face instantly turned dark as a thick killing intent flashed in his eyes. Walala. In the face of the sword that could split the universe and create shocking white waves, the Black Eagle ruler's expression turned gloomy. He snorted coldly and raised his finger to point at the sword. Jian Wushuang, it seems like you still don't understand the huge gap between an ultimate ruler and a supreme. That's the difference in the essence of power. No! Black Eagle ruler shook his head. In the next instant, a power that could distort time and space burst forth from his fingertip. Clang! After Jian Wushuang's powerful sword was flicked by Black Eagle ruler's sword, it was like a fortress piled up on the beach, beginning to fall apart inch by inch. What? Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted and an incredulous expression appeared on his face. Before he could think further, he felt a completely twisted and folded power hit his chest. Bang! Jian Wushuang retreated 1,000 feet and a huge pit appeared in his chest. Upon seeing this, the Black Eagle ruler sneered with his hands behind his back. Jian Wushuang, give up your foolish struggle and recognize your current situation. The gap between the ruler realm and the ruler realm cannot be made up for by anything. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's expression changed. He had already thought highly of the might of a supreme being, but now that he was facing one, he realized that the power of a supreme being had far exceeded his expectations. Most likely, the so-called comparable to a ruler was merely a killer move that could match an ordinary attack from a ruler. Again, taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang clenched the Wuxia divine sword in his hand and his eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot heavily and his entire body flew up again. He then slashed his sword at the Black Eagle ruler. Split open the sky. Whoosh! The sounds of weeping gods and devils, as well as the low chanting of Buddhas, rang out. The Wuxia divine sword trembled rapidly as a blood-colored sword light shot out, cleaving down toward the Black Eagle. Jian Wushuang, it's useless. The Black Eagle ruler shook his head in disdain. In the face of this earth-shattering sword, he merely flicked his sleeve. A black beam of light shot out with the swing of the sleeve. This simple swing seemed to have a force of 1,000,000 tons, pushing a passage through the void and smashing into the blood-red sword beam. Chi chi chi. The blood-red sword light was obliterated. However, at this moment, a deep and cold voice sounded in his ears. Innate divine power. Original universe. Innate divine ability. Life intimidation. Secret skill of dragon blood. Divine power ignition. Laws of the universe. Tenfold will power. Walala. In an instant, countless realms descended. Jian Wushuang's aura began to rise sharply after receiving the boost of various powers. In just a few breaths, Jian Wushuang's aura was even stronger than that of the Black Eagle ruler. In addition to the 2 killing moves of the Tarot Sword Codex, Jian Wushuang had also used all his other skills. Under the suppression of the primal universe and the intimidation of life, the aura of the Black Eagle ruler started to weaken without limit. Oh! Just as the Black Hawk ruler was about to cry out in surprise, a cold voice rang out once more. Star slash. In an instant, time and space seemed to have stagnated. Countless energies in the universe gathered in Jian Wushuang's hand. Whether it was void fragments or dark matter in the universe, they all turned into the purest energy. Like hundreds of rivers entering the sea, they shot from all directions and finally integrated into Jian Wushuang's hand, turning into a 50,000-foot silver sword rainbow. As soon as the silver sword rainbow appeared, it instantly snatched away all the light in the world. It was so bright that no one dared to look at it directly. It was as if Jian Wushuang was holding a roll of sky river in his hand. His black hair was flying and his expression was cold. He looked like a peerless sword immortal. Slash! With a cold shout, Jian Wushuang's right hand swung down heavily, and a silver sword rainbow that was 50,000 feet long finally slashed down toward the Black Eagle ruler. Oh? The previous move was just a pretense, and this sword is the real killing move. The brows of the Black Eagle ruler twitched as he casually commented. This sword attack is not bad. It already has a power that is infinitely close to that of a supreme being. However, it's a pity that without becoming a supreme being, one is still an ant. Shaking his head, the Black Hawk ruler flipped his right hand, and a pitch-black, sharp short spear appeared in his hand. The short spear exuded a strange aura. Jian Wushuang only took one look at it and he felt a sense of disgust. Break! Break! The Black Eagle ruler let out a low growl and thrust his short spear into the ground. In an instant, both the original universe and the life intimidation were shattered layer by layer as if they had met their natural enemy. Jian Wushuang, do you still recognize this god-killing spear? Black Eagle ruler sneered and quickly formed a seal with his right hand. A black ring of light quickly blasted out and struck towards the 50,000-foot silver sword rainbow. Bang bang bang. In an instant, the silver sword rainbow quickly collapsed at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Jian Wushuang's expression changed slightly. He naturally wouldn't forget about the god-slaying spear. According to what Master Heartslayer had said, the god-slaying spear was a treasure that Cosmos Temple used to restrain special life forms like Jian Wushuang. It could greatly reduce the advantages of special life forms like them. Jian Wushuang, it's time to receive my move. Black Eagle ruler sneered as he waved his right hand, sending the god-slaying spear flying toward Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's face turned grave. He quickly waved thousands of sword chi to stop the god-killing spear. Bang bang bang. However, it was useless. The god-killing spear left a long trail of flames, and there was a burst of explosion in the void where it swept past. It broke through the heavy sword chi and finally hit Jian Wushuang's divine body ruthlessly, creating a fist-sized bloody hole in his chest. By right, with the recovery of Jian Wushuang's divine power, such injuries should have recovered immediately. However, just as Jian Wushuang gushed out his divine power to recover his divine body, he suddenly felt that there was a strange power on the bloody hole that had been cut open. It was suppressing the recovery of his divine body, and it was spreading out in all directions at a slow speed. This was the power of the god-slaying spear. In the next moment, Black Eagle Ruler's body flashed and appeared above Jian Wushuang as if he had teleported. He raised his right foot and stomped down on Jian Wushuang. Bang! An earth-shaking explosion was heard as Jian Wushuang was stomped under his foot. The next moment, a divine power that was completely different from the ruler realm came crashing down and suppressed Jian Wushuang. He could not move at all. The Black Eagle Ruler sneered as he looked down at Jian Wushuang, who was under his foot, and said in disdain, "Jian Wushuang, your life and death are in my hands. What do you have to fight with me? What qualifications do you have to fight with this lord?" Jian Wushuang fell into danger instantly. Kacha. When the Black Eagle Ruler stomped down, Jian Wushuang felt his bones and muscles tremble. He tried to use his divine power to push the Black Eagle Ruler away. However, when he used his divine power to hit the Black Eagle Ruler, he felt as if a ball of cotton had hit an iron wall. The Black Eagle Ruler did not move at all. Perhaps the amount of divine power of the two was similar, but the quality was completely different. There was a fundamental difference between the ruler divine realm and the ultimate ruler. Is this the power of a ruler? Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank and he came to a realization. Only now, when he was truly facing a ruler, did he finally understand how great the gap was between a ruler and an ultimate ruler. Someone had calculated that there were tens of thousands of star areas and countless heavenly worlds in the universe. But among these tens of thousands of star areas, the number of supreme martial artists added up to less than 100. But how many ultimate rulers were there? There were so many that it was impossible to count. From this, one could see just how vast the difference between an ultimate ruler and a ruler was. Even the 9th Kulpa King, who was the most powerful ruler of the universe, was only comparable to a supreme at his peak. Comparable to a supreme martial artist? It meant that when the 9th Kulpa King used his full strength, it could have the power of a supreme martial artist's attack. However, this did not mean that the 9th Kulpa King could really be compared with a supreme martial artist. Jian Wushuang, aren't you very powerful? Aren't you the #1 expert on the ancient path of stars? Now, you better stand up. The Black Eagle Ruler lowered his head and looked at Jian Wushuang with a sneer on his face. As he said that, he exerted a little force with his right foot that was firmly stepping on Jian Wushuang. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's divine body suddenly made cracking sounds as if it could not bear the heavy load. Under the stomp, countless bones, and tendons of Jian Wushuang were broken. In the distance, many bold ultimate rulers did not leave. Instead, they watched this scene from a distance and felt a chill in their hearts. Is this the terror of a supreme martial artist? Jian Wushuang, who was invincible on the ancient path of stars, couldn't even fight back against a supreme. He's too strong. Jian Wushuang's previous attack was so powerful that it exceeded my understanding. Could probably kill any ruler. I didn't expect it to be destroyed by a supreme's sleeve. No wonder there has never been a record of a hegemon defeating a ruler since the birth of the universe. The might of a supreme martial artist is too terrifying. Jian Wushuang, this is bad. They all shook their heads. At first, they didn't know it was Jian Wushuang. However, when Black Eagle Ruler called out Jian Wushuang's name, they immediately understood that the handsome and cold-looking young man was Jian Wushuang, who had been in the limelight in the universe recently. Originally, there were many people who thought that Jian Wushuang had the qualifications to be on equal footing with a supreme after he killed Qiulong. However, when they saw Jian Wushuang being crushed by the Black Eagle with their own eyes, they finally realized that they were too short-sighted and did not know the difference between a ruler and a supreme. That gap was simply like a heavenly chasm. No matter what kind of amazing talent or magical power, it was simply impossible to cross. The Black Eagle Ruler turned his head to look at them. He did not have any intention of driving them away. On the contrary, he felt even more pleased in his heart. He wasn't considered a genius, and breaking through to the Supreme Being realm could be said to have been extremely difficult. Even within the Supreme Being divine realm, he couldn't be considered a strong person. Thus, he especially liked to ruthlessly step on those geniuses with amazing talent and wantonly humiliate them to satisfy the perverted pleasure in his heart. Jian Wushuang, submit to me obediently and I might give you a quick death. Otherwise, I will crush your bones inch by inch and strip you of your cultivation and special life form. I will make you suffer extreme pain. Looking down at Jian Wushuang, the Black Eagle ruler clicked his tongue and laughed. Submit? Are you even worthy? Jian Wushuang's expression was ice-cold as he casually slashed his sword at the Black Eagle ruler. Although he had been suppressed by a single kick from Black Eagle ruler, it didn't mean that he didn't have the strength to fight. I'm not worthy? Good. Jian Wushuang. Let's see if I'm worthy or not. The Black Eagle ruler master's face turned fierce as he casually shattered Jian Wushuang's sword. Then, a surge of supreme divine power burst out from his feet and almost crushed Jian Wushuang's divine body. He felt a sharp pain, but he didn't even frown. He turned to look at the sandalwood sword case on his back, and his mind was racing. Was he going to use this sword? However, the moment he used it, the ones who would come to kill him wouldn't just be a beginner-level supreme like the Black Eagle, but the true powerhouses who stood at the peak of the cosmos. Jian Wushuang, since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being merciless. Go to hell. A cold glint flickered in the eyes of the Black Eagle ruler as he finally decided to kill. At the same time, in the Divine Life Palace in the depths of the universe, a simple message was passed through the 9 imperial palaces, directly to the Supreme Shrine. Report. Blood Wave Supreme. Urgent news from the 9 Emperor Pavilion on the ancient path of stars. A disciple of the Divine Life Palace hurriedly walked into the main hall. He looked extremely flustered. What's the matter? The Blood Wave ruler asked with a frown. The disciple of the Divine Life Palace half knelt on the ground with beads of sweat on his forehead. Blood Wave Supreme, there was an urgent message from 9 Emperor Pavilion just now. Jian Wushuang was intercepted by Cosmos Temple's Black Eagle Supreme as soon as he left the ancient road of stars. I'm afraid he's already in danger. What? The Blood Wave ruler's expression changed drastically. He stood up from his seat with a bang and glared at the disciple of the Divine Life Palace. What's the situation? Tell me clearly. The disciple of the Divine Life Palace felt a chill in his heart when he saw the Blood Wave ruler's murderous gaze. He didn't dare to delay any longer and quickly told him the message from the 9 Emperor Pavilion on the ancient path of stars. The Blood Wave ruler was instantly enraged by his words. How audacious! Black Eagle, you're looking for death. Boom! A shocking killing intent could not be suppressed and soared to the sky. The entire Divine Life Palace was enveloped by the killing intent, as if it had fallen into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Blood Wave! What happened? In an instant, the other great rulers in the Divine Life Palace felt the boiling killing intent. Their faces changed, and they quickly rushed over. The Blood Wave ruler's eyes were cold as he replied, Jian Wushuang was killed on the ancient path of stars. What? Who killed Jian Wushuang? The supreme martial artists looked at each other, and their hearts thumped. The Blood Wave ruler stared into the distance and said coldly, Cosmos Temple, Black Eagle ruler. After saying this, the Blood Wave ruler no longer paid any attention to them. He took a step forward and left the Divine Life Palace. The next moment, his cold voice resounded in the hall. I'm going to save Jian Wushuang. Whoever stops me today will be my enemy. A look of hesitation appeared on the faces of the supreme martial artists. Just as they were about to get up and chase after the Blood Wave Supreme to persuade him not to be so reckless, an indifferent and ancient voice rang in their ears. Just let him be. The supreme martial artists looked at each other and finally nodded. They sighed and said, Yes, Ruler Gai Fu. Outside the Divine Life Palace, Blood Wave ruler transformed into a streak of light that shot toward the ancient path of stars at full speed. A moment ago, he was still at the entrance of the Divine Life Palace. In the next moment, he appeared in another star field. At this moment, the Blood Wave ruler was directly using his star field leap technique. Every time his figure flickered and leaped, he would cover a distance of hundreds of millions of miles. However, before he could reach the halfway mark of the ancient path of stars, a giant pitch-black hand slapped towards him. Blood Wave, stay. What? The Blood Wave stopped in its tracks. After it casually scattered the giant hand, it stared at the void where the giant hand had slapped. A dignified middle-aged man wearing a purple-gold royal robe and a purple-gold crown with flowers, birds, beasts, and insects embroidered on it walked out of the void. This person was the mysterious and unpredictable Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. Upon seeing this, the Blood Wave ruler laughed in anger. I'm really honored to have the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple personally stop me. The Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple smiled faintly and said, "Hehe, you're the first seat of the Divine Life Palace. I'm naturally worried about others stopping you, so I have to do it myself." When Supreme Blood Wave heard this, there was no fear on his face even when he was facing the Hall Master of the famous Cosmos Temple. His eyes flickered with killing intent as he said, "Hey you, are you really going to stop me here?" The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple stood in the void with his hands behind his back. He shook his head and said, "Blood Wave, give up. You are no match for me. No one can save Jian Wushuang today." Supreme Blood Wave's face remained expressionless, but his heart sank. He knew that Heiyu was right. He was indeed not a match for him. After taking a deep breath, the Blood Wave Supreme looked at the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple coldly and said, "You've really gone through a lot of trouble to kill this disciple of mine, who's only at the ultimate ruler realm. Not only did you send a ruler to intercept him, but you, as the Hall Master, even personally came to stop him. You're truly capable." How could the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple not hear the sarcasm in the Blood Wave Supreme's words? However, he just smiled indifferently and said, "Your Divine Life Palace has already produced a 9th Kulpa King. You can't produce another one." After a pause, he shook his head and said, "No, according to the strength of the 9th Kulpa King in the ultimate ruler realm, compared with Jian Wushuang, I'm afraid that after Jian Wushuang broke through to the Supreme Realm, his strength is far superior to the 9th Kulpa King. Such an existence naturally has to be killed as soon as possible to avoid future trouble." Supreme Blood Wave's expression turned gloomy, and his eyes flickered. After a short while, the Blood Wave ruler took a deep breath and said slowly, "Hey you, then let's wait and see. That disciple of mine might not die." "Is that so?" The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple laughed indifferently. The Blood Wave Supreme did not reply. He could only hope that Jian Wushuang could create another miracle and escape from the hands of the Black Eagle ruler, such as, once again, he used the life-saving magical power he used against Qiulong. However, what he did not know was that Cosmos Temple had already done a detailed investigation on Jian Wushuang, including Jian Wushuang's divine power decomposition previously. It was also in their hands. Could be said that they were fully prepared to kill Jian Wushuang. The entrance to the ancient path of stars. "Jian Wushuang, you won't be as lucky as last time. No one will come to save you this time." The Black Eagle ruler looked down at Jian Wushuang and sneered with a cruel expression. "Come on, Jian Wushuang. Let me torture you bit by bit. I'll let you die in pain." Black Eagle ruler sneered and exerted force on his feet. He started to crush Jian Wushuang's divine body inch by inch, starting from his feet. Ka. Jian Wushuang's indestructible divine body started to crumble under the stomping of the Black Eagle ruler. Furthermore, Black Eagle ruler controlled his divine power to the extreme. He did not cause Jian Wushuang's divine body to completely collapse and explode, but he still made Jian Wushuang feel endless pain. This supreme martial artist is so scheming and vicious. What kind of enmity does this person have with Jian Wushuang? To torture Jian Wushuang in such a way. Jian Wushuang's fate is really full of misfortune. It was not easy for him to kill Qiulong on the ancient path of stars. I didn't expect that he would be intercepted by a supreme once again. In the distance, Some of the ultimate rulers watching this shook their heads and sighed. All of them despised the Black Eagle to the extreme, but none of them dared to say it out loud. They could only shake their heads and sigh. Jian Wushuang, do you regret that you should have been killed by me when you were in 9 Glory Star area? Otherwise, why would he be tortured like this? The Black Eagle ruler laughed. However, when he looked at Jian Wushuang, who had remained silent since the beginning, he suddenly felt bored. Why didn't he beg for mercy at the moment of his death? Shouldn't he be kneeling in front of me and begging me to spare his life? Shouldn't he be crying bitterly, feeling despair and regret? Humph! Jian Wushuang, go to hell! Black Eagle ruler snorted coldly as a murderous intent surged in his eyes. He did not plan to delay any longer as he lifted his foot and stomped down on Jian Wushuang's head. This kick was aimed at taking Jian Wushuang's life. Now! Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and the Wuxia divine sword disappeared silently. Boundless darkness surged out from under his body and surged towards the Black Eagle ruler. Eternal night! With a low shout, wisps of black mist instantly enveloped the Black Eagle ruler. What is this? In an instant, Black Eagle ruler was dragged into the Eternal Night Kingdom before he could even utter a single word. A massive black ball had wrapped itself around the Black Eagle ruler, and a snatching aura began to take away everything that belonged to the Black Eagle ruler. Jian Wushuang took the opportunity to jump up, took out a large amount of divine medicine from his interspatial ring, and swallowed it. After doing all this, Jian Wushuang did not dare to relax at all. He stared at the Black Eagle ruler, who was wrapped in the black ball, and his divine power was stretched to the extreme. Jian Wushuang, an extremely furious roar came from the black ball. The next moment, the Eternal Night Kingdom started to crack inch by inch. Like a glass orb, cracks appeared on the surface of the ground. The next moment, the entire Eternal Night Kingdom collapsed. The Wuxia divine sword wailed and flew back to Jian Wushuang. At this moment, although the Black Eagle was not dead, he was in an extremely sorry state. His appearance had aged by at least a few decades. His originally arrogant and proud face had turned ashen to the extreme. His strong body had become skin and bones, dry and thin. Jian Wushuang, how dare you hurt me? A cold glint flashed in the Black Eagle ruler's eyes as he was enraged to the extreme. He was a great master, a top figure in the entire universe, but he had been injured by Jian Wushuang, a mere ultimate ruler. How humiliating was this? Jian Wushuang, you deserve to die. The Black Eagle ruler gritted his teeth, and in the next moment, his body flashed and he pounced toward Jian Wushuang. His figure seemed to have transformed into a giant eagle that could catch the moon in the sky and turtles in the ocean. He directly pierced through the void and grabbed Jian Wushuang with his 5 fingers. With this grab, the void shattered and a galaxy was crushed. A deafening eagle screech rang out in the universe. Good! A cold light flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. He was not afraid of the claw that could crush the Star River. Instead, he took a step forward and his eyes were filled with fighting intent. Black Eagle ruler, watch this sword closely. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang spat out 2 words coldly. Daybreak! Ding! A clear sound was heard. Then Jian Wushuang and the Wuxia divine sword in his hand disappeared. The next moment, a golden light suddenly appeared. The entire universe seemed to have transformed into a ray of golden light. Under this ray of golden light, the perpetual darkness of the universe was torn apart, and it was actually reflected in a dazzling manner. In the next moment, the ray of golden light shot toward the Black Eagle ruler like a bolt of lightning. Buzz! This sword cut across the starry sky and cut through the chaos. Sharp, overbearing, crushing. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. This sword was like the dawn that shot out from the depths of the night, expelling everything. Sharp, overbearing, crushing. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. All-conquering. This was the true essence of the Daybreak sword. The many ultimate gods watching the battle from a distance were all struck dumb by that sharp sword intent, and their bodies trembled. How can there be such a terrifying sword technique in this world? Godly swordsmanship. This sword is too terrifying. Under this sword, how can there be an intact egg? All the spectating ultimate gods were shocked. Even Black Eagle Ruler's pupils contracted and his expression changed slightly. He's just an Omega ruler. Why are his sword arts so terrifying? That power. Even I feel my heart palpitate. Before he could think about it, Jian Wushuang had already arrived. As if planets had collided, Black Eagle Ruler, who had transformed into a black eagle of an eagle, and Jian Wushuang, who had transformed into a ray of golden light, collided fiercely. Bang! A huge shock wave spread out, directly pushing back some of the small planets around the two of them by tens of thousands of feet. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang turned into a ray of golden light and swept past Black Eagle Ruler. He only stopped after he had traveled a few thousand feet. The golden light dissipated and Jian Wushuang was left gasping for breath. Jian Wushuang's entire body was trembling. His right hand, which was holding the hilt of Wuxia divine sword, was numb. He turned around and slowly looked at the Black Eagle. The Black Eagle Ruler stood in the void, his appearance seemingly unchanged. Suddenly, a change occurred. The next moment, the Daybreak Sword essence exploded. Countless drops of divine blood gushed out of the 987.3 million pores of the Black Eagle Ruler. It was as if a rain of blood had fallen from the sky, and the great Tao let out a wail. At this moment, the Black Eagle Ruler was in an extremely miserable state. His hair was disheveled, and his black clothes were like tattered strips of cloth hanging from his body. Blood was flowing out of his nose and eyes, and he could no longer maintain the dignity of a ruler. Jian Wushuang. Arg! The Black Eagle Ruler let out a mournful cry and turned his head to look at Jian Wushuang. He was both shocked and furious. The stroke just now had been extremely dangerous. If Jian Wushuang's power had been slightly stronger, or if he had used his supreme divine power to activate it, he would have really capsized and died in Jian Wushuang's hands. Where did this kid's divine power come from? Black Eagle Ruler's mind was filled with thoughts. First, the Eternal Night Kingdom had a hint of a one-thought divine kingdom within it. That was a one-thought divine kingdom, a supreme technique of the highest level in the universe that even he had yet to comprehend. Following that was the Daybreak Sword. It was the ultimate sublimation of the sword path, an invincible sword move that gathered thousands of sword paths into one. This kind of absolute art and divine power was enough to shake the entire universe. It was definitely not something that an ultimate ruler could create. Even he did not have the qualifications to touch this absolute art and divine power. Where did he get it from? The Black Eagle Ruler kept changing his mind as he stared at Jian Wushuang with a deep sense of fear. This brat was only at the ultimate ruler realm, but he was already able to contend with a ruler. Once he became a ruler, who in the entire universe would be able to deal with him? No. He had to take advantage of the fact that this kid had yet to fully mature and kill him in the cradle. As he thought up to this point, the Black Eagle no longer had the slightest bit of contempt or playfulness in his heart, and a cold killing intent appeared in his eyes. Jian Wushuang, it seems that I really can't tolerate you. After saying that, Black Eagle Ruler charged at Jian Wushuang with the god-slaying spear in his hand. Bang! The might of a supreme being spread out wantonly. At this moment, the Black Eagle Ruler no longer held back. His ruler aura was like a raging wave that slapped against the shore, covering the entire sky and pressing down on everything. Under the might of this ruler aura, all the races were about to submit. The 9 heavens and 10 earths trembled. With Black Eagle Ruler at the center, the surrounding 10,000 feet of land turned into a raging sea as it trembled violently. As expected, even the Daybreak Sword can't kill him? Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he sighed in his heart. He immediately made a decision. If he didn't want to die today, he would have to use his most powerful trump card. However, this was not the place to use the Tarot Divine Sword. He had to find a place with no one around. Thinking up to this point, Jian Wushuang turned to the Black Eagle Ruler and said indifferently, "Black Eagle, didn't you want to kill me? Then bring it on." After he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang turned his body and took a step forward. All of his divine power burst out and turned into speed as he shot into the distance. He remembered that not far from the ancient path of stars, there was an abandoned dead star field. There were cracks in the void and the time and space were in disorder. A void storm could blow at any time, so no one stayed there. Jian Wushuang, you can't escape. Upon seeing this, the Black Eagle ruler sneered and burst out with his speed as well, chasing after Jian Wushuang. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang turned his head to look at the Black Eagle ruler and sneered in his heart. Go on, Black Eagle. That will be your burial ground. In the universe, two streams of light streaked across the sky like lightning. Jian Wushuang's divine power was completely unleashed. With just one step, he traversed 1,000,000 miles. Behind him, the speed of the Black Eagle was also extremely fast. It was as if a huge eagle phantom was surging behind his back. With just a flap of his wings, he shuttled through the void. How can this kid be so fast? The Black Eagle ruler's eyes narrowed as his face turned dark. In his opinion, although Jian Wushuang was not a ruler, the strength of his divine power, his offensive power, and his speed all had the battle power of a ruler. If it were not for the fact that Jian Wushuang's divine power had yet to break through to the ruler divine power level and he had just entered the realm of ultimate ruler, it would be hard to say who would win today. However, it was a good thing that he had the god-slaying spear in his hand. The innate divine power of this child's special life form would be weakened by the god-slaying spear without limit. Thinking up to this point, the Black Eagle ruler's heart relaxed slightly. Licking his lips, he sneered, Jian Wushuang, when I catch up with you, I will extract your divine soul and force you to tell me about your sword principle superpowers. Then, I will destroy your divine power. As soon as he finished speaking, Black Eagle ruler opened his mouth and let out an eagle cry. A pair of huge black wings appeared on his back. As he flapped them, they broke the sound barrier in an instant, causing a loud explosion. The distance between him and Jian Wushuang was quickly shortened. What a fast speed! Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed slightly. At this rate, it wouldn't take long for Black Eagle ruler to catch up to him. The abandoned star field was at least half the distance away from where he was now. Secret skill of dragon blood, divine power ignition. Jian Wushuang growled and started to burn his divine power. His speed, which was already extremely fast, increased greatly. He turned into a flowing light and charged forward. The distance between the two of them that had been pulled apart was instantly pulled apart again. Oh? Did he use some secret technique? The Black Eagle ruler let out a softy sound, but his face didn't reveal any surprise. He had seen too many of these secret techniques, but they all had one thing in common: they could only be used for a very short period of time. Humph, Jian Wushuang, I'd like to see how long you can last with this secret skill. A sharp glint flashed across Black Eagle ruler's eyes. At the same time, he made a decision in his heart. Once he caught up with Jian Wushuang, he would kill him on the spot without saying anything more. Otherwise, with this kid's endless divine abilities and means, who knew what other tricks he would play in the future? Jian Wushuang kept moving forward. As he exploded his divine power, he took out top divine medicine from his interspatial ring and put them into his mouth to recover his divine power quickly. Even as a perfect grade special life form, it was difficult for him to recover from such an outburst of divine power. Of course, the most important factor that caused all this was the bloody hole in his chest that had been made by the god-slaying spear. Even now, the bloody hole that the god-slaying spear had left on him had not recovered. A strange burning power was constantly eroding his divine body. He had to use a lot of divine power to suppress the strange power. The two of them were extremely fast. In just a few breaths, they had completely disappeared from the intersection of the starry sky. The many ultimate rulers who had been watching the battle could only sigh in regret when they saw this. I wonder if Jian Wushuang can escape from this supreme. Whoosh! 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 Jian Wushuang and the Black Eagle ruler continued to move around in the starry sky. As the Black Eagle ruler gradually killed Jian Wushuang, he could not help but notice that the star systems around him were decreasing. Even the aura of the various laws in the void was gradually becoming thinner. However, Black Eagle ruler didn't care and thought that Jian Wushuang was already in a panic. He could clearly see that the distance between him and Jian Wushuang was constantly widening. It's close. Jian Wushuang's black hair fluttered in the wind. Black Eagle could feel that the distance between them was getting closer, and Jian Wushuang could also feel that the distance between him and the abandoned star area was rapidly getting closer. He could even see the vague outline of the abandoned star field from far away. After half an incense stick of time, Jian Wushuang suddenly stopped. "Eh? You're not running." Black Eagle ruler's eyes narrowed. Only then did he realize that he had arrived in an abandoned star field. There were chaotic spatial cracks everywhere, and spatial storms would blow from time to time. There was no sign of human life within 1,000,000 miles. However, he still did not mind. He shook his head and said, "In that case, Jian Wushuang, prepare to die." After he finished speaking, thousands of supreme divine powers surged in his hand. He lifted the god-killing spear and was about to stab Jian Wushuang. He didn't want to talk to Jian Wushuang anymore. He just wanted to kill him. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang, who had his back to the Black Eagle ruler, spoke indifferently. "Black Eagle, you're wrong. The one who's prepared to die isn't me, but you." "Me?" The Black Eagle ruler chuckled and replied, "Jian Wushuang, speaking of which, I really admire you. You're already at death's door, but you don't even know it. You're still in the mood to talk nonsense. You don't believe me?" Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and slowly turned around. He looked at the Black Eagle ruler calmly. Black Eagle ruler shook his head. Unwilling to waste any more time, he raised the god-slaying spear and charged toward Jian Wushuang. The god-killing spear flew toward Jian Wushuang with a destructive power. The strong wind blew Jian Wushuang's black hair. He looked at the god-killing spear that could destroy the world and crack the void, and his expression became neither happy nor sad. Gotcha. Suddenly, a crack appeared on the sandalwood sword case on his back. Gotcha. More and more cracks appeared. All of a sudden, the sandalwood sword case broke into pieces. A slanted long divine sword wrapped in 9 god-sealing vines as a scabbard rose. Bang! The first god-sealing vine was broken. A terrifying energy that caused the world to tremble and chaos to boil gradually began to spread. "Black Eagle, I was planning to save this sword for the Dragon Clan. Unfortunately, you've met it." Jian Wushuang sighed. Bang! The second god-sealing vine shattered. The aura that made the heavens and earth tremble and the chaos boil surged again. Under this aura, countless space storms that swept across the starry sky collapsed directly. The god-slaying spear that was coming at Jian Wushuang was even more sluggish in an instant. It was as if it had pierced through an invisible wall and was stuck between Jian Wushuang and the Black Eagle ruler. Bang bang! Pong pong pong! The third, the fourth, the fifth one, the ninth one. When the 9th god-sealing vine was broken, the tremendous sword pressure had crushed all the stars in the abandoned star field. Under the pressure of this sword, the Black Eagle ruler's entire body trembled, and he almost knelt down. A 7-foot divine sword, completely dark gold in color and covered in mysterious divine patterns, with a scarlet vertical eye on the hilt, was completely revealed. The Tarot divine sword had finally appeared. This is... Black Eagle ruler stared in disbelief at the Tarot sword hovering high up in the starry sky, and memories that had been sealed away for hundreds of chaos cycles suddenly began to flood out. Tarot divine sword! Black Eagle ruler cried out in shock. He didn't cultivate the way of the sword, so he couldn't recognize the kingdom of eternal night and daybreak. But how could he not recognize the sword of the Supreme Tarot, which had once suppressed all the heavens and worlds and shocked the universe? Back when he was still in the ruler realm, the Tarot Swordmaster, who was unrivaled and stood at the peak of the universe, had used this Tarot divine sword to stun the world and defeat all the geniuses. Even now, he could still remember how the Tarot Supreme had looked down on the universe with the Tarot divine sword. However, hadn't the Tarot divine sword been sealed away with the death of the Tarot ruler? Jian Wushuang, how did you get the Tarot divine sword? The Black Eagle ruler could not care less about the fear in his heart. His eyes were completely red as he roared. Jian Wushuang didn't answer but said 2 words, "Sword, come." In an instant, thunder rumbled and the sky changed color. The Tarot Divine Sword, which was floating in the starry sky, suddenly spun and instantly shot toward Jian Wushuang. In the next moment, the Tarot Divine Sword was in Jian Wushuang's hand. Jian Wushuang felt a connection with his heart and blood. This was the feeling he had formed after countless days and nights of nurturing with sword qi. Black Eagle, today, I shall offer your supreme blood as an offering to my Tarot Divine Sword. Jian Wushuang held the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and a terrifying burst of power that was enough to make even a supreme being bow his head surged. Then, a brilliant light that could illuminate the world spread out. Under the light, Jian Wushuang's figure disappeared and was replaced by a green-robed sword god who stood at the top of the universe. He held a wine gourd in one hand and the Tarot Divine Sword in the other. He was carefree and unrestrained, drinking the sun and moon, riding the sword and riding the wind for 90,000 miles. Tarot Swordmaster. Looking at the green-robed sword god apparition, the Black Eagle ruler's knees couldn't help but go soft, and he almost knelt down. The green-robed sword god was none other than the Tarot Swordmaster, who had been crowned the supreme figure of the primordial Tao of swords 300 chaos cycles ago. Slash! Jian Wushuang's voice sounded like it came from the ancient chaos. In the next instant, the Tarot Divine Sword slashed down toward Black Eagle ruler. No words could describe how terrifying this sword strike was. Under this sword strike, the entire abandoned star region was turned into chaos and nothingness. Countless stars and galaxies exploded and disintegrated into the most primitive particles and molecules, and the massive sword pressure seemed to freeze the entire starry sky within 1,000,000 miles. No! The Black Eagle ruler's eyes were filled with rage as a sense of fear and dread rose up in his heart. In the face of this life and death crisis, he couldn't even muster up the slightest thought of resistance. Jian Wushuang, if you want this lord to die, this lord will not let you have an easy time. I've already told the universe the secret that you possess the Tarot Divine Sword. You can't defend the Tarot Divine Sword. Even the Divine Life Palace can't protect you. Jian Wushuang, I'll take my leave first. I'll wait for you to accompany me. The Black Eagle ruler glared at Jian Wushuang with a face full of hatred. Bang! The Tarot Divine Sword was finally suppressed. The sword qi that Jian Wushuang had poured into the Tarot Divine Sword for tens of thousands of years suddenly burst out. The sword qi swept across the sky and dominated the sun and moon. Tens of millions of sword qi gushed out at the same time, covering the sky and the earth, covering the sun and the moon. It was as if doomsday had come, a great catastrophe of the universe. The Black Eagle ruler divine body began to be annihilated at an extremely fast speed under the tens of millions of sword qi. The sword had been sealed for 30,000 years, and now it was out. After 3 breaths, the world became quiet. The Black Eagle ruler had disappeared, not even leaving behind a single trace of dust. He had been completely annihilated into nothingness. A supreme martial artist of a generation had fallen. The huge and terrifying sword pressure gradually dissipated. Jian Wushuang's body shook and he almost fell from the sky. The sword attack just now had almost sucked all of his divine power dry. Although the Black Eagle ruler had died, Jian Wushuang's eyes did not show any joy. Instead, they were extremely gloomy. The thing he was most worried about had still happened. Just before he slashed down on the Black Eagle, he could clearly feel a wave of divine energy fluctuations being transmitted out from the Black Eagle. If he wasn't wrong, this was the message that the Black Eagle had sent out before his death. The only thing I can do now is to return to the Divine Life Palace as soon as possible. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed and he quickly made a decision. He had to return to the Divine Life Palace before the universe could react. Only then would he have a chance to turn the situation around. With that thought, Jian Wushuang waved his sleeve and took out Universe Boat from his interspatial ring. The Universe Boat expanded with the wind, and soon it was tens of thousands of feet tall. It pressed down on the void space and gave off a dark, cold luster. Speaking of which, he had obtained this universe boat from Qiu long after killing him. It was of a much higher grade than his own universe boat. Jian Wushuang's body flashed and he entered universe boat. Boom! The universe boat let out a roar and instantly disappeared from the abandoned star field. It broke through the speed of light, concealed its aura, and flew toward the Divine Life Palace. At the same time, in a star domain between the Divine Life Palace and the ancient path of stars, the Blood Wave Supreme's expression was gloomy as he glared at the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple, who was standing in front of him with an indifferent expression. Although he was angry, he did not dare to act rashly. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple was an ancient supreme from the same era as Supreme Master Gaifu. He was indeed far beyond his current level. Blood Wave, I'll just wait here patiently. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple smiled faintly. Calculating the time, even if there were some accidents, Black Eagle Ruler should have killed Jian Wushuang by now. Whoosh! At this moment, a message from the Black Eagle Ruler rang in his mind. Oh? Has the matter been resolved? The Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple raised his eyelids, and the smile on his face grew. But the next moment, the smile on his face froze. The Tarot Divine Sword. He let out a low cry, and his face was filled with shock. The Tarot Divine Sword. Supreme Blood Wave's eyes narrowed when he saw this. The Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple did not reply. Instead, he took a deep breath and quickly suppressed the turmoil in his heart. He turned and looked in the direction of the ancient path of stars. In a flash, he disappeared from the Blood Wave Supreme's sight. That was the Tarot Divine Sword, a supreme treasure that even an invincible ruler like him coveted. I'm afraid Jian Wushuang has changed. The Blood Wave Supreme narrowed his eyes, and a thoughtful look flashed across his eyes. Then, he chased after the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. Whoosh! 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 The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple was extremely fast. He had never used Universe Boat, but his speed was much faster than Universe Boat. He was like a beam of light, flashing through the universe. The Blood Wave Supreme followed closely behind him. For some reason, the words Tarot Divine Sword that the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple said at the end made him feel a little confused. 2 hours after Jian Wushuang left with Universe Boat, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple appeared at the place where he had fought with the Black Eagle Ruler. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple, "Hey you," closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes and said, "There are shock waves from a battle here. This sword intent should be the Tarot Divine Sword. The Tarot Divine Sword is really in Jian Wushuang's hands." Bang! Not long after, the Blood Wave Master arrived as well. He felt the remaining shock waves of the battle and immediately sensed Jian Wushuang's active divine power aura. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang didn't die. The Blood Wave Supreme was slightly relieved. As long as Jian Wushuang did not die, he could accept any other outcome. And Supreme Blood Wave's heart throbbed. Since Jian Wushuang was not dead, the one who was dead must be Black Eagle Ruler. Sword beheading a Supreme. What kind of magnificent feat was this? Hey you. It seems that disciple of mine has quite a tough life. Black Eagle Ruler, you're still not qualified to kill that disciple of mine. The Blood Wave Supreme looked at the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple and said with a smile. His eyes were filled with pride. This was the person he had brought back with his blood wave. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple's expression was uncertain. He no longer cared about the Black Eagle Ruler's life and death. The only thing on his mind was the Tarot Divine Sword. It could be said that the words Tarot Divine Sword had already drawn his entire attention. It was a pity that the universe was too vast. Jian Wushuang was like a fish in the ocean. No matter how powerful he was, he could not calculate Jian Wushuang's location in a short time. Moreover, as far as he knew, the Black Eagle Ruler had always been narrow-minded and vengeful. He had died at Jian Wushuang's hands, so he would definitely try to take revenge on Jian Wushuang before he died. Therefore, it was destined that he would not only tell him the news that Jian Wushuang had the Tarot Divine Sword. In fact, the situation was just as he had expected. Almost at the same time, The Black Eagle ruler's dying message was transmitted to all the major powers in the universe. The Tarot Divine Sword was born and was held by Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang had killed a supreme being with the Tarot Divine Sword. As soon as this news was released, the entire universe was in an uproar. All the races were shocked and boiling. The Tarot Sword was a treasure of the universe. Back then, the Tarot Swordmaster had only been a top-tier supreme being. However, with the Tarot Sword, he had become one of the invincible supremes in the universe. He had been undefeated in tens of thousands of battles, and he had subdued the universe with a single sword. Even among the invincible supremes, he had killed more than one. How could those supreme martial artists not covet this? How could they not be envious? Moreover, the Tarot Divine Sword was in Jian Wushuang's hands. All of a sudden, regardless of whether they were skeptical or not, all the major forces sent their experts out of seclusion to the universe to find and kill Jian Wushuang. They knew that it would be best to get the Tarot Sword before Jian Wushuang returned to the Divine Life Palace. Once Jian Wushuang returned, it would be difficult to get the Tarot Sword. In the abandoned star area, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple's expression was uncertain. He raised his head and looked at the Blood Wave Supreme with a murderous look in his eyes. He knew that the Blood Wave Master and Jian Wushuang had a good relationship. Although they were not master and disciple, Jian Wushuang had always been respectful to the Blood Wave Master. He was definitely an important figure in Jian Wushuang's heart. He was considering whether he should capture the Blood Wave Supreme and use him to head to the Divine Life Palace to force Jian Wushuang to hand over the Tarot Divine Sword. Although the ruler Blood Wave was powerful, he was still no match for him. However, when he thought of Supreme Master Gai Fu, who was in charge of the Divine Life Palace, he dispelled this idea. This old man was much older than him. Although he had been struggling on his last breath because of that battle, if he really kidnapped the ruler Blood Wave, there was no guarantee that the old man would not go crazy and attack him at all costs. At the same time, the ruler Blood Wave had also received a message from the Divine Life Palace. The Tarot Divine Sword was in Jian Wushuang's hand. Supreme Blood Wave's expression changed drastically upon seeing this. He didn't need to think to know how much of a stir this would cause in the universe. The Tarot Divine Sword was an important weapon of the universe. It could be said that any supreme who wielded the Tarot Divine Sword would become one of the most powerful existences in the supreme divine realm, aside from the few kings who stood at the peak of the universe. To those supreme martial artists, this was an extremely huge temptation. Some supreme beings, especially those who were proficient in sword principle, would definitely go crazy to find Jian Wushuang and seize the Tarot Divine Sword. Jian Wushuang couldn't protect the Tarot Divine Sword, and neither could his Blood Wave. When Tarot Supreme first obtained the Tarot Sword, he had also suffered countless assassinations. However, at that time, Tarot Supreme had already become powerful and had listened to that lord's lecture at the Great Clan Gathering. His strength had improved, and he had killed so many people that the universe had submitted to him. He had used his strength to make people not dare to have any ideas about the Tarot Sword in his hand. But Jian Wushuang, how far away was he from Supreme Tarot? The Blood Wave Supreme's heart burned with anxiety at this thought. He took a step and disappeared from the abandoned star field. The only thing he could do now was to find Jian Wushuang as soon as possible and bring him back to the Divine Life Palace. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple did not stop the Blood Wave Supreme when he saw him leaving. Instead, he used 2 fingers to perform a hand seal and quickly calculated Jian Wushuang's location. After a while, "I found it!" The eyes of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple flashed. He took a step and disappeared from his original spot, heading in a certain direction in the universe. Within the universe, Jian Wushuang drove Universe Boat and hid in the void, hurrying toward the Divine Life Palace. He didn't dare to waste any time or use the Universe Passage because he wasn't sure if there would be anyone waiting to kill him outside the Universe Passage. He could only steer Universe Boat and constantly change routes, rushing back to the Divine Life Palace with extreme caution. In fact, it was just as Jian Wushuang had expected. Almost every universe passage from the ancient path of stars to the Divine Life Palace had a supreme being waiting for them. As long as Jian Wushuang showed up, he would be greeted with a storm of attacks. However, even though Jian Wushuang was very careful, he was still stopped when he was halfway to the ancient road of life. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's life was hanging by a thread again. In the vast universe, a universe boat that was shining with a dark luster stood quietly. In front of universe boat, for supreme beings with powerful auras and different appearances stood together with their hands behind their backs, blocking the way. Jian Wushuang, stop. I'll spare your life as long as you hand over the tarot divine sword, considering your rare talent. A gray-haired old man wearing a robe with stars in the sky said. If there were cultivators from the Seven Palace Star area here, they would recognize that this old man was the ruler of the Seven Palace Star area, the Seven Palace Supreme who had been in closed-door cultivation for many years. Ruler Seven Palaces had spent dozens of chaos cycles in secluded meditation within the Earth's core, seeking enlightenment of the Tao. He hadn't expected that the appearance of the tarot sword would actually draw him out. That's right. Jian Wushuang, hand over the tarot divine sword and I can guarantee your life. Another old woman with her silver hair coiled up and holding a twisted dragon head walking stick also spoke. This old woman was the master of Lotus Heart Island. She was also a supreme being expert. Hand over the tarot divine sword, and I'll spare your life. He. Quickly recognize the situation and don't make any unnecessary resistance. As for the other two supreme martial artists, one of them had an eerie aura like a ghost, while the other had a solemn appearance. They were both famous supreme martial artists in the universe. Jian Wushuang stood in the universe boat and looked at the four through the black light mirror with a gloomy expression. He had been extremely careful, and the journey to the Divine Life Palace had been full of twists and turns. Sometimes he had even done the opposite. He had not expected that it would still be the same, and he would still be stopped. Could it be? Are you really going to hand over the tarot divine sword? Jian Wushuang lowered his head to look at the tarot divine sword at his waist, and a touch of coldness flashed in his eyes. He was afraid that he would still be killed if he handed over the tarot sword. After all, he had stolen a treasure from a top-tier genius in the universe. It was better to eliminate the route to avoid future trouble. The reason why they were still circling around Jian Wushuang was that none of them wanted to be the first to stand out and offend the Divine Life Palace, in case they got their revenge later. However, Jian Wushuang believed that this was only temporary. Before long, someone would make a move. Between the threat of the Divine Life Palace and the Tarot Divine Sword, they would naturally choose the latter. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang walked out of Universe Boat step by step. He had already made a decision. The current him, with the Tarot Divine Sword in hand, was not afraid of these supreme martial artists. As long as any of the four supremes dared to make the first move, Jian Wushuang would risk everything and use the Tarot Divine Sword to kill the first person. Oh, finally willing to come out. The Seven Palaces Supreme raised his eyes and looked at Jian Wushuang as he spoke indifferently. The other three great masters also put on a fake smile. They looked at the Tarot Divine Sword on Jian Wushuang's back, only revealing its hilt, and their eyes flashed with unconcealed greed. The Tarot Divine Sword was a universe treasure. Whoever could obtain the Tarot Divine Sword would be able to increase their strength by several times. Jian Wushuang, come. Give me the Tarot Divine Sword and I'll let you go. In front of the Tarot Divine Sword, even these supreme martial artists couldn't help but swallow their saliva and lose their composure. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang pulled out the Tarot Divine Sword from his back and pointed the tip of the sword at the four great supremes. He tilted his head and sneered, I'm sorry, but I won't hand over the Tarot Divine Sword. If anyone wants to take it, you can try. After saying that, Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with fighting intent. People often said that those who did not enter the supreme divine realm were still ants. The difference between a supreme and a ruler was like the difference between a god and a mortal. Today, Jian Wushuang might as well slaughter a god and show the world. Jian Wushuang, are you threatening us? The seven palace rulers were so angry that they laughed. They were universe rulers, yet they were threatened by an ultimate ruler? If you don't believe me, you can try. Jian Wushuang looked at him with a calm expression. You! The Seven Palaces Supreme was furious when he heard this, but he seemed to have thought of something. After snorting coldly, he did not say anything else. The Black Eagle ruler's corpse was probably still cold, so he was not sure if Jian Wushuang, who was holding the Tarot Divine Sword, would be able to kill him. For a moment, the atmosphere fell into a strange stalemate. The four great supremes' faces were gloomy as they looked at the Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand. Their eyes were full of greed and there was a touch of deep fear. In the end, it was still the man in black with the sinister aura who laughed sinisterly. If we don't act now, we might not have a chance when the others come. When the three of them heard this, their faces turned cold. That's right, the entire universe was after Jian Wushuang, and no one knew when another supreme would come to this place. Immediately, the master of Lotus Heart Island, a hunchbacked old woman with her hair tied up, said in a hoarse voice, "In this queen's opinion, the four of us should join forces to kill this brat first. As for the ownership of the Tarot Divine Sword, we'll choose the strongest person from the four of us." The four supreme martial artists looked at each other and quickly made a decision. Kill Jian Wushuang first. Looking at this scene, Jian Wushuang's face was unmoved, but his heart was filled with the desire to fight to the death. What about the four great masters? Just a battle. Go! The black-robed man with a sinister aura sneered first. A nine-headed scimitar that emitted a strange aura appeared in his hand. He took a step forward and charged at Jian Wushuang. The other three great supremes also unleashed their Dao techniques. The seven palace supremely pulled with his hands, and seven fist-sized round beads suddenly appeared. These 7 round beads were refined from 7 planets, and each round bead's attack was no less powerful than the self-destruction of a planet. When 7 round beads were used to form a formation, the power would be extremely great. As for the old woman, she took a step forward and countless red lotus flowers appeared in the sky. The 4 great masters had attacked Jian Wushuang at the same time. Kill! Jian Wushuang's eyes glinted coldly, and he poured all his divine power into the Tarot Divine Sword. In an instant, a terrifyingly sharp destructive aura rose sharply with Jian Wushuang as the center. The eye on the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand suddenly opened. Countless threads of blood filled the air. This aura, it really is the Tarot Divine Sword. When the 4 great supremes felt this majestic aura that could destroy the heavens and earth, they trembled all over, and their hair stood on end. In their eyes, Jian Wushuang's figure became blurry and was replaced by a carefree figure who was drunk on the world and riding on a sword. That was Supremacy Tarot. Slash! A cold voice was heard. Jian Wushuang held the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand and slashed at the 4 great supremes. A dark golden sword light that could illuminate the sun and the moon burst out from the Tarot Divine Sword. It was as if a great tribulation had descended from the heavens, and it rudely attacked the 4 great rulers. The 4 great rulers looked at the sword, and their pupils shrank. The old woman said in a deep voice, "Everyone, Jian Wushuang already has the power to kill a supreme with the help of the Tarot Divine Sword. We must not underestimate him and follow in the footsteps of the Black Eagle ruler." When Jian Wushuang had become an ultimate ruler, his strength had already been infinitely close to that of a supreme. Otherwise, he wouldn't have nearly killed the Black Eagle with his daybreak. Now that he had the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand, he no longer had any fear. How could his strength have increased by more than 10 times? Could be said that Jian Wushuang with the Tarot Divine Sword and Jian Wushuang without the Tarot Divine Sword had a huge difference in fighting power. When Jian Wushuang's sword slashed down, the world suddenly roared, the sky changed color, and the sun and moon lost all their luster. The divine bell of fortune, the separation of yin and yang. Jian Wushuang fixed his eyes on the 7 palaces supreme. He could feel that the strongest of the 4 supremes was the 7 palaces supreme. However, he could only use the Tarot Divine Sword once, and after that all his divine power would be drained. If he wanted to live, he could only hope to kill the 7 palaces supreme with this strike and deter the other 3 supreme martial artists. Then, he could quickly take the divine medicine to recover his divine power. Go to hell! Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth and let out a low roar. The Tarot Divine Sword slashed down fiercely at the 7 palaces supreme. Pong pong pong. The sword first shattered the falling red lotus petals with its sword pressure. Then the sharp sword light forced the old woman, the black-robed ruler, and the solemn-looking man to retreat. Finally, it cut down on the head of the seven palaces ruler. Clang! The seven fist-sized beads in the hands of the seven palaces ruler collided with the tarot divine sword. A monstrous sword will burst out from the tarot divine sword, turning into a long rainbow and shooting straight into the sky. Under this sword will, the seven round beads instantly trembled thousands of times and released the power of stars at the same time, making crackling sounds. Then, a shocking scene happened. The bead made of seven stars let out a wail and cracks appeared on its body. The cracks grew more and more until it finally exploded. Bang! The first star pearl exploded. Pong pong pong. The second one. The third. The fourth. None of the seven star pearls were spared. They were all crushed by the tarot divine sword, a sword that destroyed seven stars. What? A look of shock appeared on the face of the seven palaces supreme. One must know that each of the seven star pearls was made of a planet and countless divine materials and cold iron. In terms of grade, they had already reached the limit of a treasure of the universe's laws. When the seven star pearls were combined, they were comparable to a supreme divine weapon. However, the seven star pearls were all destroyed by the tarot divine sword. The power of the tarot divine sword is rare. The seven palace ruler gasped, then raised his head to look at the tarot divine sword's sword light that was still pressing down on him. His expression was extremely grave, and he shouted in a low voice, "Secret technique! Seal the heavens!" As soon as he finished speaking, countless starry rivers surged out around him. These starry rivers were like dragons and seemed to contain spiritual chi. They all rolled up and intertwined, forming a large net that wrapped around the tarot divine sword. As a supreme martial artist of his generation, he had thousands of secret arts and divine abilities. This heaven-sealing technique was one of the strongest defensive techniques that could dissipate a supreme martial artist's attack. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed coldly and he said, "Innate divine ability, life intimidation." At that moment, time and space seemed to stop. A realm that could suppress all races descended. This realm was invisible, but within it, Supreme's seven palaces movements suddenly slowed down, and he couldn't help but feel like kneeling down and bowing to Jian Wushuang. This was the suppression and superiority of a higher life form over a lower life form. It had nothing to do with one's realm. The reason why Black Eagle Ruler was so difficult to deal with was because of the god-slaying spear in his hand. Could greatly weaken Jian Wushuang's advantage as a special life form. However, Seven Palace Ruler did not have it. Bang! The tarot divine sword fell into the net, and a scene that shocked the Seven Palaces Supreme happened. The heaven-sealing net, which was originally in a stalemate, was greatly reduced in power after Jian Wushuang's life intimidation descended. In the end, it was split in two by the tarot divine sword without any hindrance, and finally slashed on his body. No! A muffled sound rang out. The divine body of the Seven Palace Ruler couldn't put up any resistance against the sharp edge of the tarot divine sword. He was killed and turned into ashes. The Seven Palace Supremes were dead. After the Black Eagle Ruler, Jian Wushuang wielded the tarot divine sword and slashed at a supreme. In an instant, the three masters of Lotus Heart Island, who had been charging toward Jian Wushuang, stopped in their tracks and looked at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. How could this kid be like this, like this? The old woman pointed at Jian Wushuang with a trembling finger, her face full of shock and anger. She wanted to use a word to describe Jian Wushuang, but she couldn't think of one. Jian Wushuang suppressed the intense pain in his divine body and looked coldly at the remaining three supreme masters. Killing the Black Eagle Ruler had already drained all of his divine energy. Even after fleeing for a few days, he had not fully recovered. Now that he had forcefully killed the Seven Palaces Ruler, his divine body had long been exhausted. He was like an oil lamp on the verge of dying, an arrow at the end of its flight. "Don't you all want my tarot divine sword? Then come and take it." Jian Wushuang stared at the three supreme masters coldly and said indifferently, The three of them squinted their eyes when they heard this, and a cold glint appeared in their eyes. Jian Wushuang, you can't scare me. I don't believe that you, a mere ultimate ruler, can forcefully activate the Tarot Divine Sword a few times. I'm afraid it's difficult for you to even stand now, right? The black-robed Supreme Master stared at Jian Wushuang with a sinister aura and sneered. Then you can come and try. Jian Wushuang's cold eyes shot straight at the black-robed Supreme Master, and he seemed to be giving in. You! The black-robed ruler was so angry that a nameless flame began to burn within him. He was 90% sure that Jian Wushuang was bluffing, but he didn't dare to take the risk. If Jian Wushuang could activate the Tarot Divine Sword again, even if it was just one attack, it was not something he could withstand. With a cold snort, the black-robed Supreme Being no longer spoke. His expression was a mixture of various emotions. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief and quickly recovered his divine power. If there was anyone present, they would have noticed this strange scene. The three great supremes were actually forced to hesitate when facing Jian Wushuang, who was only an ultimate ruler. Their eyes were filled with fear, just as the atmosphere was at its most deadlocked. A faint voice resounded in the void again. I found it. In the next moment, a dignified middle-aged man wearing a purple gold crown and a king's robe embroidered with flowers, birds, beasts, and insects walked over from the distance. When he lifted his foot, he was still at the edge of the sky and was just a small black dot. However, when he took a step, his figure had already appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple had arrived. His expression was indifferent. He didn't even look at the Master of Lotus Island and the other three Supremes. Instead, he looked straight at the Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand. After staring at it for about 3 breaths, he turned his eyes slightly and looked at Jian Wushuang again. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's body trembled violently, and his face was filled with horror. The pressure that this person's gaze brought to him was even more terrifying than the 4 great rulers' joint attack. Who was he? Bang! The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple's gaze seemed to have traveled through the universe and landed on Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang felt that his divine body was on the verge of collapsing under his gaze, and his heart turned cold. Who was this person? How could he be so powerful? Almost instantly, Jian Wushuang was sure that even with the Tarot Divine Sword, he was far from being this person's opponent. You are Jian Wushuang? The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple glanced at Jian Wushuang indifferently. It was as if he had seen through Jian Wushuang, and there was a strange look in his eyes. The 4th level Sword Principal Origin, a perfect grade special life form, and the Tarot Divine Sword. With such talent and opportunity, he'll probably be a fatal threat to Cosmos Temple if he grows any further. It would be a waste to just kill him. Why don't we bring him back, extract his life level, and refine his soul? The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple shook his head and said, Jian Wushuang, come with me. After saying that, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple stretched out his hand and clenched his 5 fingers. In an instant, an invisible hand seemed to form in the void and lifted Jian Wushuang up. As for the other 3 great supremes, they had already shrunk to one side after the arrival of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. They were as silent as cicadas in winter and trembling. Just as the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple picked up Jian Wushuang and was about to leave, an earth-shaking roar suddenly exploded in the sky. I am here. Who dares to take Jian Wushuang away? Bang! A bolt of blood-red lightning shot over from the distance. The crimson lightning was extremely fast. In an instant, it landed in front of Jian Wushuang. With a wave of his hand, it shattered the hand of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. This person was none other than the Blood Wave Ruler, who had charged over at all costs. The Blood Wave Ruler. Jian Wushuang looked at the back of the man in front of him and felt touched. He couldn't help but call out softly. Supreme Blood Wave turned to look at Jian Wushuang and felt his divine body was like a lamp that had run out of oil. His eyes were filled with endless regret, and he said guiltily, Little fellow, I'm late. I've made you suffer. Jian Wushuang forced a smile and said, You're not late. I'm sorry for the trouble. The Blood Wave Supreme smiled back and stroked Jian Wushuang's hair like a kind elder doting on his beloved junior. His eyes were full of admiration and comfort. What trouble? When I brought you back to the Divine Life Palace, I promised you that I would protect you for the rest of your life. Little fellow, leave the rest to me. After saying that, the Blood Wave Supreme took a deep breath and suddenly turned around. He looked coldly at the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple and the three great Supremes and said, I'm here. If you want to take Jian Wushuang away, you'll have to step over me first. A heaven-shaking, earth-shattering aura that could cause chaos to boil and shatter rose from Ruler Bloodwave's body. The three great masters were like frightened quails in the face of this aura. Their legs were trembling. So strong. The old woman's expression changed greatly. Only the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple remained unmoved. He glanced at the Blood Wave Supreme indifferently and said, Blood Wave, you can't protect Jian Wushuang. The Blood Wave ruler snorted coldly as a cold fighting intent appeared in his eyes. It's not up to you to decide whether we can protect them or not. Let's just fight. Seeing this, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple sighed and said, Blood Wave, I wanted to spare your life at first and let you live for a few more days. Since you want to die, then you can die with Jian Wushuang. With that, he pulled out a blood-red god-killing spear that was 3 feet long. The aura of this god-slaying spear was somewhat similar to the one in the hands of the Black Eagle ruler. However, they were also completely different. This was because this god-slaying spear was much more powerful. The destructive aura it exuded was actually not much weaker than that of the Tarot Divine Sword. Furthermore, it was as if this god-slaying spear had a heart beating within it, constantly letting out muffled thuds. The Blood Wave ruler's heart trembled upon seeing this. Come on, Blood Wave, let me see if you've improved after all these years. The Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple shook his head and waved his right hand gently. In an instant, the god-killing spear stabbed toward the Blood Wave Supreme. This stab seemed completely ordinary and didn't contain any sort of power. It was as if any Omega ruler would be able to take it on, but Ruler Bloodwave's face was extremely grave. Break! The Blood Wave ruler formed an incantation gesture with 2 fingers and shouted coldly. In an instant, 3 blood pillars rose up behind him. These blood pillars were like 3 tornadoes that connected heaven and earth, and their power was terrifying to the extreme. Before the 3 blood pillars could display their power, a huge pressure had already spread out, causing the void to collapse and turn chaotic. Quickly retreat! The faces of the 3 island masters of Lotus Heart Island changed drastically. They were all supremes, but under this pressure, they felt as small as ants. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, did not feel any pressure under the special care of the Blood Wave Master. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion was heard. The seemingly ordinary god-slaying spear exploded with indescribable power after colliding with the 3 blood pillars. It was as if the universe had fallen into a great calamity. A monstrous power that could destroy the world rose up. Just the astral winds from the collision were enough to tear apart any ultimate ruler. Around them, there was originally a medium-sized starfield. In the end, the entire starfield exploded just from the aftershock of the collision between the 2. This was a battle between gods. A huge shock wave spread out, and it was extremely bright. Everyone subconsciously closed their eyes. It was the same for Jian Wushuang. He felt so insignificant in the battle between the Blood Wave Supreme and the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. It was as if he was an ant in the mortal world, looking up at the battle between the gods in the 9 heavens. It was a realm that he could not reach even with the Tarot Divine Sword. After the shock wave dissipated, it was a long time before everyone slowly opened their eyes. Jian Wushuang quickly looked at the Blood Wave Supreme and saw that his right sleeve had been torn apart. His face was pale. The Blood Wave ruler. Jian Wushuang couldn't hold it in any longer. He roared and his eyes turned red. It's fine. The Blood Wave ruler stretched out his hand and waved it with great difficulty, indicating that he was fine. Blood Wave. It seems like you are much stronger than you were in the previous battle. However, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple narrowed his eyes and said, Although it seemed like a casual attack, in fact, that attack just now was extremely dangerous. It contained 80% of his power as an invincible supreme martial artist, and ordinary top supreme martial artists could not take it at all. The blood wave supreme forcefully suppressed the searing heat in his divine body and looked up at the hall master of Cosmos' divine palace. He took a deep breath and said, "Hey you, stop with the nonsense. No matter what, I will accompany you to the end today. Blood wave, you're cutting off your own path." The hall master of the great Cosmos temple shook his head and a cruel smile appeared on his face. "Since that's the case, I'll satisfy you, blood wave." As soon as he said that, the god-killing spear gathered its power again. This time a terrifying aura surged. At the tip of the god-killing spear, there was a cold red light, as if it was going to pierce a hole in the sky. All kinds of rules evolved and settled on the god-killing spear. At this moment, even the magnetic field of the universe was changed and triggered, as if the great Tao of the universe was about to emerge. A battle between supreme beings was a clash of laws. Supreme blood wave. I'll just give him the Tarot Divine Sword. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang clenched his fists tightly and said, he knew that the ruler blood wave was in danger of dying from this attack. He asked himself, ever since I joined the Divine Life Palace, it has always been the ruler blood wave who has constantly supported and protected me. What have I brought to the ruler blood wave? He had already owed the ruler blood wave far, far too much. He couldn't let the ruler blood wave risk his life for the sake of the Zenith Sword. When the blood wave supreme heard this, he turned around and stretched out his hand to press down on Jian Wushuang's shoulder. Then, he shook his head and said with a serious expression, Jian Wushuang, the Tarot Divine Sword is your opportunity. It's also the thing you can rely on to break through to the supreme level and stand at the peak of the universe. You can't hand it over so easily. After saying this, the ruler blood wave continued in a deep voice, Jian Wushuang, believe in me. As long as I'm still alive, no one in this world can bully you. Jian Wushuang wanted to say something, but the blood wave master had already turned around. Come on. The blood wave supreme glared coldly at the hall master of Cosmos Temple. Jian Wushuang looked at the back of the blood wave master. For the first time, he felt so weak and hated himself for not being stronger. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this moment, a few more rays of light appeared in the starry sky. Ha ha ha. I finally found the Tarot Divine Sword. Hey you. Don't tell me you want to keep the Tarot Divine Sword for yourself? That brat. Quickly hand over the Tarot Divine Sword. 3 rays of light descended and turned into 3 supreme figures. The Supreme Being of the Southern Sea. Supreme Wuji. The Deputy Hall Master of Blood Sky Hall. The Island Master of Lotus Heart Island cried out in alarm. The 3 great rulers were attacking again. The 3 of them were all well-known supreme masters in the universe. They were all invincible in the universe. Limitless Supreme was a top master among the supreme masters, and ordinary supreme masters like them could not compare to him. Even the hall master of Cosmos Temple was shocked when he saw the 3 of them. The blood wave supreme's heart sank to the bottom. There were already 7 supremes present, and the hall master of Cosmos Temple was an invincible supreme. There must be more supremes rushing over from afar. I'm afraid we won't be able to settle this peacefully today. The ruler blood wave raised his head and looked into the distance. He was looking in the direction of the Divine Life Palace. The only thing that could save them now was the Divine Life Palace. He had already sent a message to the Divine Life Palace. Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, the blood wave supreme turned to look at Jian Wushuang and said with a smile, Little fellow, if we were to die here today, would you be afraid? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes swept across the 7 great masters' faces. He suddenly felt a sense of pride and laughed. It's just death. What's there to fear? Thanks to the ruler Bloodwave's delay, he had already recovered more than half of his divine power. Enough for him to use the Tarot Divine Sword again. Even if he had to die today, he would drag another supreme martial artist down with him. Ha ha ha. What a good. What fear. Jian Wushuang. Let's join forces and fight together. We'll turn the world upside down and fight to the death. The ruler Blood Wave clapped his hands and laughed heartily as a heroic aura soared into the sky. His blood waves had swept across the universe for tens of millions of years. When had he ever been afraid? It was just as Jian Wushuang had said. However, what was there to fear about death? As for the three new supreme martial artists, they had already cast their greedy eyes on the Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand. Things might change if we delay. Let's kill these two first and get the Tarot Divine Sword, he thought. That's right, to prevent any accidents. Let's kill these two first. Jian Wushuang, you're just an ultimate ruler. You should be proud that you're being hunted down by the seven of us, even if you die. The seven great supremes spoke one after another, eager to make a move. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple snorted coldly. Since there were people who could work together to kill the Supreme Blood Wave and the others, he naturally could not do so. After all, he was confident that with his strength, the Tarot Divine Sword would eventually fall into his hands. Kill! The Deputy Hall Master of Blood Sky Hall said coldly as he took a step forward and charged toward the Blood Wave Supreme and Jian Wushuang. The other 6 Supreme Martial Artists also charged forward. In the blink of an eye, the 7 Supreme Masters killed Jian Wushuang and Blood Wave at the same time. The enormous and terrifying power seemed to be able to destroy the world, causing the heavens and earth to boil. The violent wind stirred up countless spatial storms. Kill! Upon seeing this, a cold killing intent flashed across Supreme Blood Wave's eyes. The supreme divine power in his body surged and turned the surrounding area into a churning blood pool. Kill! Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold. He raised the Tarot Divine Sword, and a brilliant sword power spread out. The two of them were already prepared to die in this battle. Bang! At this moment of life and death, a huge and sharp axe light suddenly hacked down from the distance. I, Supreme Giant Axe, am here. Who dares to hurt the people of my divine life palace? Along with it, there was an earth-shaking roar. A 10 million feet tall rough giant strode over from the distance. He was shrouded in endless chaotic immortal radiance and held a giant axe that could split the sky and earth. In front of him, the sun was like a bullet and the river of stars was like a bathtub. He could pluck the stars with a raise of his hand and destroy the earth with a step. Supreme Being Giant Axe had arrived. Immediately after, a second roar came. I, Ruler Heavenly Dipper, am here. Who dares to hurt the people of my divine life palace? In another direction, a topless middle-aged man with sharp eyes pulled the bowstring and released an arrow. A godly arrow shot out like a lightning bolt. The arrow instantly cut through the sky, leaving a 10,000 feet long white wave in the universe. It directly blew up a planet in its way and continued to shoot forward with destructive power. I, the White Tiger Ruler, am here. Who dares to hurt the people of my divine life palace? A third roar rang out. A star-sized sharp metal white tiger stepped out of the void and roared into the heavens. Terrifying shockwaves were deafening, and a tangible killing intent covered the world, causing all things to fall silent and all races to tremble. On the back of this huge white tiger, there was a burly man in the middle. He was wearing a ferret robe and a white forehead pad. He was holding a scimitar. As he shouted coldly, the white tiger under him opened its mouth and roared out a destructive light wave. Finally, an old and indifferent voice sounded in everyone's mind as if it had traveled through the universe. I, Supreme Master Gai Fu, am here. Who dares to hurt the people of my divine life palace? I, Supreme Master Gai Fu, am here. Who dares to hurt the people of my divine life palace? When this indifferent and old voice sounded, in an instant, the expressions of the 7 great supremes, including the Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple, changed drastically. The 5 lead disciples of the Divine Life Palace had actually come together. Even Gai Fu is here. The Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple's eyes flashed wildly. What do we do now? The Island Master of Lotus Heart Island, who was the weakest among the 7 people, said with trembling lips. The 5 lead supremes of the Divine Life Palace were all top supremes who had gone through countless storms and battles. This was especially true for Supreme Master Gai Fu, who was so ancient that they didn't even know his origins. Even the few Supreme Masters at the peak of the universe were extremely wary of him. Blood Wave, I've been waiting for you. Supreme Giant Axe strode forward like a primordial immortal king. With every step he took, the universe trembled violently and shattered countless void fragments. Behind him, Supreme Heavenly Dipper was holding a divine arrow in his hand and following closely behind like an arrow god. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Once, when the universe was still in chaos and the myriad races were at war, he had shot 9 golden crows with 9 arrows in a row and was at his peak. Although it had been dozens of chaos cycles since he had fired an arrow, no one doubted his power. Blood Wave, I'm late. The White Tiger ruler leaped out. The sharp gold-white tiger beneath him actually had 2 eyes, and every step it took ignited a black flame footprint in the air. As the light in its eyes changed, it looked at the 7 great rulers as if it was about to devour them, causing the 7 supreme ruler to feel a chill run down their spines. They walked over and stood beside the ruler Bloodwave. A monstrous aura rose up from them, as if it was going to collapse the ancient times and shake the 9 heavens and 10 lands. You guys. When the ruler Bloodwave saw this, he nodded with a complicated expression. He wanted to say something, but in the end, all his words were condensed into one sentence. All right, he said. When the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple saw this, his face turned extremely gloomy. However, he did not care about the 4 great supremes. Instead, he looked into the void far away. An old man with age spots all over his face and an aura of decay was walking over. He was expressionless, as if he was an ordinary old man. However, with every step he took, he directly crossed the chaotic space and time. Overpowering supreme martial artist. He was the strongest expert in the Divine Life Palace. Other than the Palace Master who had long disappeared, he was the pillar of the Divine Life Palace. Even if the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had disappeared, as long as he was still in charge of the Divine Life Palace, the Palace of Life would be the top power in the universe. Gai Fu, Jian Wushuang actually managed to lure you out? The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple said slowly with a solemn expression. Supreme martial artist Gai Fu was expressionless as he raised his eyes to look at him. He then said indifferently, Hey you, your Cosmos Temple has gone a little too far in recent years. Too much. The Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple sneered, and his eyes were filled with mockery. Gai Fu, if I'm not wrong, you haven't recovered from your injuries from that battle. Have you? Let me guess, how many more times can the current you attack? Twice? Or 3 times? Supreme martial artist Gai Fu didn't reply. He only quietly spat out a single word. Kill! In an instant, White Tiger Ruler, Heavenly Dipper Ruler, Giant Axe Ruler, and Ruler Bloodwave all responded in agreement. A towering battle intent erupted from the 4 of them. They looked at the 7 great masters without the slightest fear or solemnity. On the contrary, they were extremely relaxed and bold. Bloodwave, how long has it been since the 4 of us fought side by side? Supreme Giant Axe laughed. The ruler Bloodwave smiled and replied, It's been nearly a few hundred chaos cycles since that battle. Supreme Heavenly Dipper didn't say a word. He raised the divine bow in his hand, and a scarlet arrow condensed on the bowstring. As for the White Tiger Supreme, he took the lead and charged toward the Black-Robed Supreme who had tried to kill Jian Wushuang first, as well as the solemn-looking man. Bloodwave, Big Dipper, Giant Axe, just wait and see. I'll deal with these ants. Roar. A deafening tiger's roar resounded, shaking all directions. The White Tiger Supreme's heroic spirit soared to the sky, and his bloodthirsty aura shook the universe. The White Tiger was in charge of killing, while the White Tiger Ruler was the supreme expert who walked out from the endless killing. Ha ha ha! I haven't moved my muscles for a long time. Leave them to me. The Supreme Giant Axe laughed out loud. The giant axe in his hand split the sky and earth apart, slashing out a shocking axe light. The axe light was hundreds of thousands of feet long and directly split a galaxy into pieces. Then, It slashed down fiercely at the strongest expert other than the Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple, Limitless Supreme. A smile appeared on the ruler Bloodwave's face as he watched this scene. It was as if he had traveled through time and space to return to that unparalleled battle all those years ago, when they had fought side by side. The blood in his body began to boil. He turned to look at Jian Wushuang and said with a smile, "Jian Wushuang, just watch how we old men will protect you." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his foot heavily and turned into a pillar of blood that pierced the sky. With a destructive might, he charged toward the Deputy Palace Master of Blood Sky Palace and the Supreme of South Sea. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists tightly. At this moment, he felt his blood boiling in his chest. This was the first time he had felt the power of a sect. Bang, bang, bang! At this moment, the surrounding billions of miles of space were struck and rumbled as if they had fallen into a chaotic sea. The heaven and earth were wailing. Countless supreme divine arts shot up into the sky. They were extremely brilliant and spectacular, as if they had opened up a magnificent epic. Roar! The planet-sized acute metal white tiger opened its mouth and roared. Destructive sound waves shot out from its mouth, blasting countless giant holes in the starry sky. "You two pieces of trash! How dare you try to attack my divine life palace?" With a sneer on his face, the White Tiger Supreme was fighting against two people alone. He was facing the Black-Robed Supreme and the solemn-looking man who had tried to kill Jian Wushuang at the beginning. Not only was he not at a disadvantage, but he was also overbearing, as if a king who was in charge of killing had descended to the world. The sharp golden white tiger's palm slammed down, shattering the myriad of techniques unleashed by the two, and sent the black-robed supreme martial artist flying tens of thousands of feet. On the other side, Supreme Giant Axe was fighting Limitless Supreme. Both of them were top-tier supreme beings, and as they exchanged blows, a shocking fluctuation burst out. Bang, 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 bang! The entire starry sky trembled. Supreme Giant Axe was tens of thousands of feet tall, as if he had transformed into an ancient god who had created the world. His left eye was the moon, his right eye was the sun, and the veins protruding from the surface of his skin were the towering mountains. Every time the giant axe in his hand slashed down, it would bring with it a power that could destroy the world, forcing Limitless Ruler to retreat repeatedly, his body trembling. "Come! Kill me!" Supreme Giant Axe roared as he fought madly, causing all the Supremes present to shiver in fear. The expression on the face of the Limitless Supreme Being was extremely ugly, and an obvious look of fear flashed through his eyes. The entire universe seemed to have fallen into a boiling chaos. Countless words could be used to describe the horror of this battle. Countless holes appeared in the sky, and the ground was constantly being shattered. Whoosh! 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 Supreme Heavenly Dipper's expression was cold and detached. Every arrow that was shot out blocked the escape routes of the 7 great rulers, leaving bloody holes in their bodies. The battle between the Blood Wave Supreme, the South Sea Supreme, and the Blood Sky Palace's Deputy Palace Master was even more terrifying. At this moment, everyone finally realized how terrifying the ruler Blood Wave was. 3,000 great Daos emerged from the Blood Wave Supreme's body and turned into a world of corpses and blood. The divine bodies of South Sea Supreme and the Deputy Palace Master of Blood Sky Palace were continuously destroyed as they cried out in pain. South Sea Supreme and the Deputy Hall Master of Blood Sky Hall were both high-level and top-tier Supremes in the universe, but they were unable to retaliate against the Blood Wave Supreme. They were constantly defeated and were in imminent danger. Although the Blood Wave Supreme was only a top-tier Supreme, he was much stronger than ordinary top-tier Supremes in terms of combat power. Although he seemed to be in a difficult position when he faced the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple, he had an overwhelming advantage when he was facing a supreme being of the same realm. The battle had entered a state of slaughter from the very beginning. With Supreme Heavenly Dipper cutting off their escape route, the 7 great Supremes were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered, constantly being slaughtered. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. At that moment, his divine power had finally recovered completely. Immediately after, he turned his gaze to the Master of Lotus Island, the acrid and mean old woman. No one knew if it was intentional or not, but Supreme Blood Wave and the others had made the old woman stay. You should die. Jian Wushuang looked at the old woman coldly. When the old woman heard this, her expression changed and she shrieked, Jian Wushuang, what are you doing? Jian Wushuang did not answer. Instead, he raised the tarot divine sword and swept it toward the old woman. When the old woman saw this, a cold light flashed in her eyes. She understood that the situation had already been decided. If there were no accidents, she would not be able to escape death. The only chance of survival was Jian Wushuang. If he wanted to live, there was only one way, and that was to abduct Jian Wushuang and threaten the 5 lead supremes of the Divine Life Palace to let him leave. Thinking of this, a cold sneer appeared on the old woman's face. She muttered to herself, Jian Wushuang? Oh Jian Wushuang, since you're looking for death, don't blame me. Bang! As soon as she finished speaking, the old woman turned over her right hand and took out a lotus lamp from her interspatial ring. There was no fire on the lotus lamp, but there was a flirtatious red lotus swaying slightly, emitting a faint red light, reflecting the old woman's face, making it even uglier. Slash! Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold and his black hair was flying in the air. He slashed the tarot divine sword at the old woman. A brilliant sword pressure descended, instantly snatching away all the brilliant light in the area. Like a river of stars, it pressed down on the old woman. This sword cut across the sky and pierced through the sun and moon. Looking at the dazzling tarot divine sword, the old woman's eyes were filled with surprise. Then, the surprise in her eyes was replaced by regret. Old friend, I'm counting on you this time. She looked down at the red lotus lamp in her hand and muttered to herself. With a push of her hands, the red lotus lamp immediately shot out and shone brightly in the air. Countless rays of red light shot out, like the sunset glow at night, painting the starry sky a gorgeous red. The lotus core of the red lotus lamp suddenly expanded in the wind and turned into a towering red lotus that connected heaven and earth. The next moment, bang! The tarot divine sword ruthlessly slashed at the red lotus. A strange scene appeared. After the tarot sword struck the red lotus suddenly began to absorb the endless power of the tarot sword like a balloon. What? Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank. Kacha! Kacha! In the next moment, the lotus lamp started to crack. It was like a bucket with a sealed mouth that was constantly filled with water. Finally, it could not take it anymore and exploded. Bang! With a wail, the towering lotus flower broke into pieces. The power of the tarot divine sword had also disappeared. Seeing this, a touch of resentment flashed across the old woman's face. She stared at Jian Wushuang and said coldly, Jian Wushuang, you've caused my treasure to be destroyed. You deserve to die. After she finished speaking, the old woman laughed and countless red lotus fire surged around her and rushed toward Jian Wushuang. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang was slightly surprised, but he didn't panic. This time, when he used the tarot divine sword, he didn't use all of his divine power. He still had some power left, which was enough to deal with the old woman. Just as the old woman was about to catch Jian Wushuang, and he was about to use the daybreak sword to end her life. The sound of an arrow breaking through the air rang out. A spear-like scarlet arrow broke through the void and pierced through the divine body of the Lotus Island Master. Along with the remaining force, it was sent flying. Ah! Arg! The old woman screamed in pain. Divine power burst out from the scarlet arrow and shattered her divine body. The master of Lotus Island had fallen. In the distance, Supreme Heavenly Dipper looked at Jian Wushuang and smiled. Little fellow, that red lotus was born from the primordial chaos and is capable of withstanding a world-destroying blow. It can be considered a life substitution talisman. Be careful. Jian Wushuang nodded at him gratefully. After the time for one incense stick to burn, Supreme Giant Axe was the first to end the battle. He turned around and strode in the direction of the Blood Wave Supreme's battle. After the time for 3 incense sticks to burn. At this point, other than the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple, The other 6 great Supremes had been completely massacred by the joint forces of Supreme Bloodwave and the others. At this moment, the cold wind whimpered and the great Tao wailed. It was as if the heavens and earth were mourning for the 6 great rulers. The fall of 6 great masters. How shocking was this? Once it was spread, the entire universe would be shaken. After killing their respective opponents, Supreme Giant Axe, Supreme Bloodwave, and the other 2 stopped and looked into the distance with their hands behind their backs. There were only 2 people there. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple and Supreme Master Gai Fu. At this moment, the expression of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple was extremely ugly. He was no longer as calm as before and was staring at Supreme Master Gai Fu with fear in his eyes. Gai Fu, you can't even protect yourself now. Do you really want to waste your chance to attack for Jian Wushuang? The Palace Master of Cosmos Temple growled. Supreme Master Gai Fu's expression was neither happy nor sad when he heard this. He did not reply and only extended a finger to point at the great Cosmos Temple Master's glabella. Rumble. In an instant, a destructive aura that seemed to come from the ancient times, which caused the universe to perish, the chaos to boil, and the great Tao to be annihilated, rose in the void and slowly condensed. Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu had made his move. At that moment, not only Jian Wushuang, but even Bloodwave, Giant Axe, and the other lead disciples squinted their eyes and stared at Supreme Gai Fu, who was standing alone in the void. Bloodwave, it's been hundreds of chaos cycles, but we haven't seen Ruler takedown attack, have we? The White Tiger Ruler said with a smile. The Bloodwave Supreme nodded his head and a look of reminiscence appeared in his eyes. That's right. In the past, before we had risen to power, it was Supreme Master Gai Fu and the Palace Master who supported the Divine Life Palace, allowing our Divine Life Palace to have its current glory. Everyone smiled and discussed as they looked into the void. Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu pressed down with his finger. In an instant, countless great Tao rules evolved, turning into countless mountains, rivers, suns, moons, stars, birds, beasts, and insects. The next moment, the void was torn apart. A huge finger that looked like a pillar that held up the sky slowly extended out of the pitch-black crack in the void. No words could describe the horror of this finger. Under this finger, it was as if the Milky Way had turned into a mountain stream, and the stars had turned into sand and dust. Everything seemed insignificant and tiny in front of this finger. The fingerprint on this finger was clearly visible, as if it had transformed into countless great Tao rules, surrounded by a storm. Kachuk. This finger slowly pointed toward the Hall Master of the Great Cosmos Temple. Before it even landed, its terrifying power had already crushed the surrounding void as if it was a piece of rotten wood. What kind of strength is this? Jian Wushuang was aghast at the sight. Just the faint pressure from this finger alone was enough to make his entire body shiver. His blood was frozen stiff, and even his right hand, which was holding the Tarot Divine Sword, was trembling slightly. Gai Fu, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple, roared when he saw this. He, who had been locked onto by this finger, felt as if the great Tao of heaven and earth was pressing down on him. His mind was in a frenzy. Break for this, senior. He rubbed his hands hard, and the star-destroying god-slaying spear appeared in his hands again. Then he slightly tilted his head back, as if he was pulling a bow and throwing a javelin. The vast and surging supreme divine power gathered in his hands, and then he blasted it toward the finger. It was like a needle against an awn, like the stars colliding. Bang! With an earth-shaking explosion, a bright light spread out from the point of collision. At this moment, it was as if the universe had been destroyed. The earth-shaking explosion directly condensed into a physical substance, turning into rolling sound waves that crushed the surroundings. The rumbling sound waves annihilated the surrounding void, turning it into a void of nothingness before crashing toward the ruler Blood Wave and the others. Jian Wushuang, be careful. The Blood Wave Master's expression changed slightly. The shock waves from the battle had no effect on him, but to Jian Wushuang, it was no different from a disaster. Pung, pung, pung. He waved his palm 3 times in a row before he managed to break the shock wave that was coming at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's face turned pale. Although the shock wave didn't hurt him, it shook his mind. A moment later, when everyone looked up again, whoosh! The god-killing spear let out a wail and only managed to block Supreme Master Gai Fu's finger for 3 breaths before it was sent flying by the vast power and shot to an unknown place in the universe. The finger continued to land on the divine body of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple without any hindrance. Bang! In an instant, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple's divine robe was torn apart, and the purple gold crown on his head exploded. His black hair fell down and he looked extremely pathetic. And this was only the beginning. The finger continued to press down, and the divine body of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple immediately crumbled. Am I going to die? Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank. Supreme Bloodwave shook his head and replied, That fellow, hey, you will not die so easily. After a few seconds, the supreme divine body of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple completely collapsed and turned into a pool of black water. As for Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu's finger, its power had also been exhausted, and it dissipated with the wind like a sand painting. However, Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu's face was still indifferent and expressionless. Chi. A strange scene appeared. The Cosmos Temple Master's divine body collapsed, and the pool of black water that he had turned into twisted continuously. Then, it turned into countless black crows, spread their wings, and flew into the distance. A moment later, the group of black crows collided with each other and recondensed into the appearance of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple. Although his body had reappeared, his face was abnormally pale. He glanced at Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu from afar, his eyes filled with fear. Just now, he had sensed a power that was no less powerful than the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace. Good. Gai Fu, since you're not considering the big picture and are forcefully attacking, I'll leave for now. But since you don't have much time left, I'd like to see who will protect the Divine Life Palace after you die. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and stared at Jian Wushuang coldly in the distance. His eyes were full of killing intent. Jian Wushuang, you're lucky this time. But don't worry, I'll take you and your sword away sooner or later. When the time comes, I'd like to see who else can protect you. With that, he took a step forward and turned into a dark light, shooting into the distance. He knew that with Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu here today, it was impossible for him to obtain the Tarot Divine Sword. You want to escape? When Supreme Giant Axe and the others saw this, they snorted coldly and decided to chase after him. At this moment, Supreme Master Gai Fu waved his hand and said weakly, Let him be. You can't stop him. When Supreme Giant Axe and the others heard this, they hurriedly looked at Supreme Master Gai Fu, only to see that his already aged face had aged even more. His turbid eyes were filled with lethargy. Supreme Ruler Gai Fu. Supreme Giant Axe's face changed slightly in an instant, and his heart began to race. He was afraid that this time, Gai Fu, who was already on the verge of death, would be even more seriously injured. I'm fine, don't worry. Supreme Master Gai Fu took a deep breath, then slowly turned his eyes to Jian Wushuang. He didn't say anything. He just looked at Jian Wushuang deeply and said, We can't stay here for long. Let's go back to the Divine Life Palace first. They were all decisive people, and they knew that it would not take long for other Supreme Masters to swarm over. They nodded and took Jian Wushuang with them, turning into a shocking escape light and flying toward the Divine Life Palace. Several days later, they returned to the Divine Life Palace. After returning to the Divine Life Palace, Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu immediately gave the order to seal off all the passageways of the Divine Life Palace and refuse visitors. He also activated the Palace Protecting Formation and set the Divine Life Palace to the highest state of alert. A few days later, the news of the battle between the Divine Life Palace and the 7 Great Supremes spread like a bomb being dropped on a calm lake. It completely exploded in the universe and set off an explosion. This news was like a flood that had collapsed a dam. With an extremely fast speed, it instantly spread throughout the entire universe, engulfing the world. In an instant, The universe boiled and all races were shocked. The discussion of this battle could be heard from almost every corner of the universe and from anyone. The alliance of the 5 lead supremes of the Divine Life Palace has appeared. They are invincible against the 7 supremes. Supreme Master Gai Fu has made his move and defeated the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple with 1 finger. The death of a ruler. It's rare to see 7 Supreme Masters fall in one day. The universe was filled with discussions about this battle. Only then did they realize how terrifying the Divine Life Palace, which had been silent for many years, was when they finally emerged. Previously, when Giant Axe Master and Blood Wave Master had fought their way to the Great Void Temple for Jian Wushuang, countless people had been amazed by the Divine Life Palace's power. However, compared to this battle, Giant Axe Master and Blood Wave Master's fight against the Great Void Temple was not even worth mentioning. The universe had been peaceful for far too long. Therefore, the commotion caused by this battle was almost unprecedented. Everyone was discussing the Divine Life Palace's strength and how much more powerful it had become. They were also discussing how terrifyingly powerful the Supreme Beings had become. Of course, the most discussed topic was still the main character of the battle, Jian Wushuang. He killed 2 supreme martial artists with his sword. Never before. Jian Wushuang killed a few supreme realm experts with his ruler body. Jian Wushuang's battle is enough to be recorded in history. It will shock the ancient and modern. I'm sure that as long as Jian Wushuang doesn't die, the universe will become Jian Wushuang's era when he advances to the supremacy stage. Countless people went crazy over it and regarded Jian Wushuang as the future master of the universe. Jian Wushuang had become the center of the storm in the entire universe. However, these discussions were only circulating among the rulers of the universe. The true almighty experts of the universe, the rulers, were silent. Within the Great Void Temple, bang! The newly appointed Emperor God, Supreme Master Bingyi, smashed the armrest of his chair with his palm. His face was ashen to the extreme. He had never thought that Jian Wushuang, whom he had regarded as an ant and sent Qiulong to kill on the ancient path of stars, would not only survive but grow to such an amazing extent in such a short time. He felt as if everything he had done had become Jian Wushuang's stepping stone, which made him extremely angry. Trash. All trash. What Hall Master of Cosmos Temple? He can't even take down Jian Wushuang, who is only at the ruler realm. Supreme Bingyi clenched his fists tightly as he muttered to himself in a bone-chilling voice. Outside the main hall, the other palace masters all sighed, not knowing what to say. For the first time, for some reason, they felt a faint sense of regret. In the solar star field, in the Golden Crow's habitat, in the sun occupied by the great Emperor Golden Crow. Lin have you fully recovered from your injuries? A dignified voice was heard. A middle-aged man wearing a flame royal robe approached them. It was the Golden Crow Emperor. Father, I've recovered from all my injuries. I've also gained some enlightenment during my recent closed-door training, and my strength has improved. The Emperor Golden Crow was sitting cross-legged in meditation. But when he heard the voice, he stood up and turned around with a smile. Not bad, you're able to become braver with every setback. With such a heart, you'll definitely become a great person in the future. A hint of admiration flashed through the Golden Crow's eyes. I'm still far from that. Speaking of which, all of this is thanks to Father's advice that day, allowing this child's heart to open up, and only then did this child understand the opportunity. The Emperor Golden Crow said humbly, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. This pride came from his confidence in his own strength. Right now, he might not be comparable to a supreme martial artist, but he could definitely take a blow from one. After a short pause, he continued, Father, I've already made up my mind. I'll get back up from where I fell. I heard that Jian Wushuang has left the ancient path of stars, and I'm going to fight him again. I'm confident that I can defeat Jian Wushuang this time. Then, he raised his chin and looked at Great Emperor Golden Crow expectantly. However, he noticed that the Golden Crow's expression was extremely strange. Father, what's wrong? Is there anything wrong? Is Father worried that I will be defeated? The Emperor Golden Crow scratched his head and said with a smile, "Father, don't worry. I'm definitely strong enough to fight Jian Wushuang now." Before he could finish, the great Emperor Golden Crow took a deep breath and interrupted him. You've been in closed-door cultivation recently. You missed the latest news about Jian Wushuang. Eh? Could it be that Jian Wushuang had already been killed? That's a pity. Instead of answering, the great Emperor Golden Crow took out a jade cylinder and handed it to the Emperor Golden Crow. "Take a look for yourself." With that, Emperor Golden Crow turned and left. "Father, why are you acting so strange today?" "What?" The Emperor Golden Crow opened the jade cylinder. After a while, a sword slashes a ruler, slaughtering divine realm experts in succession. The Emperor Golden Crow's mouth was wide open and his eyes were filled with shock. 9 Emperor Pavilion, Headquarters. A pavilion made of red tiles and green stones was floating in the air. In the pavilion, 3 supreme beings were sitting around a round table. In front of them, there was a scroll that recorded the details of Jian Wushuang killing 2 supreme beings in a row. Heartslayer. Isn't Jian Wushuang the boy you saved in 9 Phoenix Star area back then? A red-robed old man with long eyes looked at the elegant old man in the middle of the 3 and said with a smile. The old man was none other than Heartslayer, who had saved Jian Wushuang's life in 9 Luminaries Star Field. "When I saved this kid, it was just a casual act. I didn't expect him to have such an opportunity," Supreme Heartslayer said with a smile. Among the 3, the last supreme martial artist was a purple-haired youth. He said expressionlessly, "Red Ear, Heartslayer. We are now discussing the 9 Emperor Pavilion's attitude toward Jian Wushuang." After a pause, the purple-haired young man continued in a deep voice. "The Tarot Divine Sword is an important weapon in the universe. Almost all the Supremes in the universe are eager to get the Tarot Divine Sword. I'm afraid they will join forces to put pressure on the Divine Life Palace and ask for the sword. As one of the top forces in the universe, what should we do?"